Well, welcome everybody to our first segment for the Virtual Writers Festival. I'm joined in conversation by a poet, someone with a vast background in the NZ entertainment industry, Richard von Sturmer. He's had 7 books published. He has been involved in numerous plays and films. As well as a bit of the music industry. So welcome, Richard. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks, Brett. Thanks for the invitation.
No worries. So I suppose our conversation begins with the way we were able to get in touch with you in the first place. Recently, you've taken up sort of a position as writer in residence. Writer in residence for Waikato University.
Yeah, it's really great. It's a real privilege to be able just to concentrate on writing projects and to get paid as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that always helps, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's a somewhat unique position, isn't it? That I think a lot of authors would be envious of.
Yeah, there are a number of residencies offered to writers around the country. I think there's one in Dunedin, Palmerston North, and I just applied for the Waikato one, and I was lucky enough. It's always, if you're a writer, it's always lottery.
Right.
And I've applied for residencies in the past and haven't got them. So, you just have to keep on plugging away.
Right, yeah. Well, you've had a fairly decent career sort of in both, entertainment and in writing, poetry specifically. So what, if you don't mind briefly answering, what's sort of been the journey to get to where you are now?
Oh, okay. Well, like a lot of people, I started writing poetry when I was a teenager. But, when you start writing, especially as a teenager, you're often a bit shy and don't want to share your writing.
Yeah.
But I had an uncle from Australia who came over regularly to New Zealand, who I was quite close to. He was sort of like a magical uncle. He did lots of different things. He had a law degree and a psychology degree, and he could hypnotize people. And,
oh, wow.
And anyway, so I showed him some of my poems, and he said, these are okay, but, have you thought about writing songs? Because at that point they were rhymed and they had a good rhythm to them.
Yeah.
And right. So that sort of struck a chord, so to speak. And so a few years later, I started writing songs.
Right.
And that sort of, especially when I began to be involved with musicians. And I also, parallel path was, I was in the 70s, about 75, 76, when I was just moving out of high school, going to university. I was with Auckland's first street theatre group called the Zazu Clowns.
Oh, that's awesome.
With friends like Derek Ward and David Mann especially, and both David and Derek had been involved in Theatre Corporate. They'd sort of left Theatre Corporate, which was the main theatre company in Auckland at the time, and they were writing their own material, which is really inspiring. So when I first started the Zazu Clowns, I wasn't writing performance pieces, but I was really inspired to be with other people who are writing their own material. So gradually I began to write performance scripts as well.
Oh, right. Becomes a bit of a echo chamber sometimes, doesn't it? And you begin to, have other performers rub off on you.
And it's good because we realized there were other performance groups in Auckland, other actors. Often if you're an actor, you're in limbo if you don't have a play to work on, or someone's not hiring you for TV or for film work.
Yeah.
If you can write your own material, that's the key. Then you can perform it. You can always have a platform to perform your work. So that was a really important lesson I learned early on: is to write your own material. Then you won't be dependent on other projects.
I suppose you become self-sufficient in a way.
Yeah.
To a degree.
Yeah. And you learn other skills. I learned skills in mask making, commedia dell'arte.
Yes, yeah.
Quite a few workshops. So yes, as soon as you start performing, you start learning all sorts of different things.
Exciting stuff. So you were a part of that street theatre group then, and you obviously had that sort of background. Was it the Plague? Is that your punk band?
Yeah, that's from about when I came back from London, I think the beginning of 1977. I
Right.
was I was all fired up because I'd seen a lot of punk bands. It was like the peak of punk was in
Yeah. Right.
1976 and in London. So yeah, I got all fired up with punk.
That's awesome.
So I came back and we formed one of the first punk bands in New Zealand called The Plague. And we were a little bit different because we were sort of political and theatrical and yeah.
I suppose you added that you took what you had learned from your play background, and you can transfer that into the musical sort of entertainment sector.
And at the very start of The Plague, we weren't musical at all in true punk fashion.
Yes, right.
We had a 15-year-old, well, no, actually, he came later. We had an art professor playing saxophone. We had a philosopher on drums. And Tim Mann, who was later Blam Blam Blam, was just learning his instrument. And John Schmidt was just learning to play the guitar. So it was really starting from scratch.
It's about the presence, isn't it?
Yeah. And then later on, after a year or two, members left and new members joined the band who were far more musical. Like Ian Gilroy, who was at Lake Boys High School, was 15 years old when he's a great drummer. He first started drumming with us. Mark Bell, who's a wonderful guitarist, he was about 16, and Andrew McLennan, and Tim Mann, who later on to Blam Blam Blam. So we got a lot of young musicians. I mean, I was in my early 20s, but these guys were in their teens. So they seemed young to us.
Yeah.
The older members. Yeah. And it was really great because we could actually develop more as a band and develop our songwriting. I'm not a musician. Sometimes I get labeled as a musician, but I play very rudimentary percussion. Yeah. But I love working with musicians. I love just that collaboration. Seeing my lyrics being transformed into song is really it's always been a pleasure. It continues to this day that I work with different musicians.
Is that something that you think is unique to musicians as an art form? Is that collaborative nature?
I think so, yeah. And sometimes they write music to my lyrics. And more recently, I've been writing lyrics to different sort of tunes that I've been presented with. So
is that a bit of a different process?
A little bit, yeah. I tend to be, when I write songs, I tend to be quite a rhythmic writer.
Yes, right.
It's not too difficult for musicians to pick up on that.
Following that, how did you sort of get into, because that seems like quite a jump, doesn't it? If you go from, your punk band days to then being a published author with your first collection of poetry a few years later, what was sort of the journey into being a published poet?
Oh, well, first, like anyone, you have to sort of build up a little body of work before you have your first book. So I through the early 80s, I was sort of published in different literary magazines.
Okay, yeah.
And I did Albert Wendt's creative writing course, I think, in 1986. And Albert is a really good friend and mentor for me. He's a great mentor for many, especially Pacific writers, but even beyond that. So he was very encouraging. And I published my first book about a year after I did his course. And I just happened, it was a book of prose poems, which was sort of quite unique at the time, called We Xerox Your Zebras, which is WXYZ, We Xerox Your Zebras. And it had a lot of sort of really quirky prose pieces, playing with words, a little bit in the style of Italo Calvino, who was a writer I was influenced at the time. So yeah, it was a good book to start off with.
Right.
It had quite an underground history. A lot of writers really liked it. I once, a long time ago, I was at a party, and one writer there, his girlfriend came up to me and she said, "Oh, I'm a nurse, at a retirement home in South Auckland, and we read your book, Research as part of your book, to the patients in the rest home, along with other poetry, and they really love it. And some can even recite whole passages. And then she paused, and then she said, and of course, most of them have dementia. So anyway, I took it as a compliment.
No, absolutely. It means you can read the book over and over again.
Yeah.
And I understand you spent a bit of time at the, is it the Rochester Zen Buddhist retreat?
Yeah. In 81, 82, and my wife went to Italy, to Bologna, and we studied theatre for about a year at the Scuola Nuova Scena, which is a Commedia dell'arte school in Bologna.
Oh, that's awesome.
Our teacher was Alessandra Galante Garone. So it specialised in mask and clown work. I got a Creative New Zealand grant to go to Italy because I just felt like I need to just improve my theatre skills. And then we spent a bit of time in London, did some really great workshops for different teachers in London. And when we came back from there, we had a performance duo called the Humanimals. So we toured around New Zealand, performing original stories using masks and costumes and films and slides. And then, but it was sort of a fairly formative period in Italy. Italy's always in chaos. So we had a little bit of a hard time in Italy trying to find somewhere to live. The school that we studied at it was good, but it wasn't exactly what we expected. I was sort of thrown into a bit of a crisis, and I had a book with us called The Three Pillars of Zen, which is it's one of the really essential texts for Zen in the West. And it really resonated with all the teachings of Zen Buddhism. So we decided that when we got back to New Zealand, as well as performing, we'd really look into Zen Buddhism and try and get a teacher. And the author of Three Pillars of Zen, Philip Kaplow, has a centre in Rochester, upstate New York. So eventually we found our way to upstate New York and began training and working at the Rochester Zen Centre under Philip Kaplow's disciple, and he took over the centre, Bowden Colty, who was our teacher. And so it was really, just seemed really good to develop that side as well.
Right. And did you find that coming out of that training, you had a significantly different outlook on life or the way or your lifestyle?
No, I didn't really. What Zen, a lot of meditation retreats is what it's good for is it's sort of, if you can imagine your mind cluttered with furniture, it just removes a little bit of the furniture, so your mind's a little bit more spacious.
Right.
And that's a great thing for being a writer, because you're just more attuned to your environment, what you receive through the ears and eyes, nose, tongue, touch. And I'd been writing haiku, short verses, and tanka, which is sort of slightly longer verses, Japanese literary forms which have become prevalent in the West. And there's, in the history of Japanese poetry, of course, Zen plays a big role. So I found that a meditation practice was really good for my writing. That
actually brings me to my next question, which is about haiku and tanka, which is obviously a lot of the poems you write are sort of in that form. I think that often haiku and short form poetry can sort of be cast to the wayside a little bit in favour of longer or more extravagant poems. I suppose what I would love to hear your thoughts on is what real strengths you think short form poetry has over some other forms?
I think, well, Wordsworth talked about spots in time, which I really like. At certain moments in time, things crystallize, that you really get a good insight into the world, and really good short verse forms like haiku or tanka can really capture that particular moment in time.
Right.
Something happens, or you get an insight into the world that you want to share. So I think that's one of the strengths of short form verse. Often it's very much written in the present moment.
Capturing that
The
specific
difference between
piece of time.
and the difference between haiku and tanka, one writer, it's a really good analogy. Haiku is very objective. It's just observing or capturing something in the outside world in a verse form. With tanka, you've got 2 more lines. So tanka can be more subjective. You can enter into it. You do your own. You can the poet can enter into the poem more, and it can be more emotional. And it's a bit like holding 2 mirrors. Haiku is a mirror that reflects your surroundings, and tanka is like a mirror that reflects the surroundings but also reflects you as well as the writer. And actually, at the moment, I prefer tanka because it's got that extra dimension to it.
Right.
And there can be surrealists. In the history of Japan, there are socialist tankas, surrealist tankas, sketches from life tankas, which are a little bit more like haiku. All sorts of different ones, romantic tankas, erotic tankas. And at the start of the 20th century, there were a number of Japanese female tanka writers who wrote quite erotic poems. So yeah, there's a whole gamut of subject matter.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's a very, from what you've just said, it sounds like it's a very broad genre and definitely not something to just put in a box then and go, oh, that's short form. Yeah.
What I tend to do, sometimes I'm difficult to pin down for people, especially if you think of, a poet is this person, a writer is that person, a performer is that person, a musician is that person. I really like to blur boundaries. I think that's important to, not to define your limits too much or your writing style.
Right. And I suppose in terms of not limiting your writing style, that again comes back to a different published bit of writing you've had, which is your memoir, This Explains Everything.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit about the process in writing that?
Oh, okay. Well, This Explains Everything. Well, it's in 3 parts. The first part is about my dad, my relationship to my dad. He was like a small person like me, and I was very close to my father. The second part is about my grandfather, my father's father, who was one of the first people, one of the first Europeans to explore the Kimberley region in Australia during the Great Depression.
Yeah.
He was a prospector. So it's a telling of his story. And then the third part is about me. And that's the most experimental part. It's more an autobiography of my different writing styles.
Yes.
Prose poems, song lyrics, short verse form. But yeah, so the first part is the actual memoir about my dad. And that took quite a long while. I let it sit for quite a few years. This was published in 2016, only 4 years ago. But I actually wrote the first draft probably in about 2008 or 2007. And then I let it sit quite a few years. And it's really good being a writer. If you've got something completed, then you can revisit it and either expand it or sculpt it, cut bits out so you get to the essence. And you want to tell a story that's both personal, that's true to your own experience, and universal, which will resonate with your readership. And that's a fine balance. And I just realized I had to cut out things that were too things that were too sentimental. So I sort of cut out. And I also cut out things which were too explanatory as well. Because you can lead sometimes to the reader to read their own way into a work. And then because of that long process, I finally felt it was ready to be published.
So what role do you think then that writing played? Because obviously memoir would probably be the most widely recognized form of particularly autobiography. But in terms of preserving individual stories, what sort of role do you think writing plays and has played?
Oh, I think, yeah, everyone likes stories. So it's very important to tell stories, personal stories, imaginative stories that haven't been told before.
Mm.
So any writing, creative writing, is also always an exploration into storytelling, different modes of storytelling, some conventional, some experimental.
Mm.
Which is the best mode to tell your story? That's a big question for a writer.
Yeah, that is a really good question. What is the mode?
It's good to have a number of modes. And one mode that I really prefer, that I really like, is the prose poem, which again blurs blurs distinctions. It's an odd beast because it's not a poem, but it's not straight prose. It's a prose poem. So it's prose with a very strong poetic element. And I find that that's a form like tanka that I'm really attracted to, and I can work well with. So the latest work that I'm working on, called Slender Volumes, as part of my residency, is a collection of 300 7-line prose poems, and I've just completed that during lockdown.
Exciting. I suppose some good things come out of quarantine. Yeah. Oh, well. I was really interested by what you said just earlier about the process of writing your memoir, and you mentioned that you had to cut out things that were a bit too sentimental. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? What's the idea behind cutting things out that might be a little bit too sentimental?
It's a tricky one. Because I was really close to my father, towards the end of the life, my mother died in 1986, and my dad didn't die till he died in 1990. I got it here. 1997. So he was a widower for about 11 years, and towards the end of that, he got depressed and he began drinking too much. So it was a way of approaching his use of alcohol, his dependence on alcohol, how to treat that without being too sentimental or feeling sorry for him, but still keeping the connection. So I sort of focused on his a wine cup he used to have, and how I finally threw his wine cup into the ocean and said, "Dad, you've got no more need for that." And that seemed a good way to end off with the section about his drinking, because he was a heavy whiskey drinker all his life, as was my grandfather, the prospector. So I came from a family of heavy drinkers. I don't drink, but so it's often good to have something concrete. So I focused in towards the end on just the image of his wine cup, which was very ornate. It was sort of nearly medieval, and going to Milford Beach after he died and throwing his wine cup into the ocean. That seemed like a good way to go. Wasn't sentimental, strong, but still addressed that issue.
Yeah, right. So again, you don't want there to be, you want there to be enough sentimentality for the reader to have a connection to what you're writing, but not too much so that you're telling them what to feel.
Yeah, that's the other thing is you don't want to slip into cliches. That if you write in a sentimental way, you're always slipping into some sort of cliche. So that's something to avoid.
Absolutely. In reading some of your poetry, I've noticed there's often strong themes of nature and the environment. That's something you mentioned earlier as well, that particularly the Zen lifestyle can help unclutter your mind and help you be a little bit more aware of the environment that you're in. Could you tell me a little bit more about maybe why it is that you are influenced by nature, and a lot of your work reflects that.
Oh, I think probably goes back to my childhood. My dad sort of loved animals. He would always take me to the zoo when I was, about 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, numerous. And so I've always felt a connection with animals. In fact, the performance duo that I formed with my wife, Amala Wrightson, in the 80s, we called ourselves the Humanimals, which is human and animal sort of combined to be the Humanimals. So that's always been a strong theme. I became a vegetarian, much to my mother's distress when I was 15. I stopped eating meat. I just couldn't eat meat anymore. Animals. Another writer, I think might have been Kafka, said, "Animals are my friends. Why would I eat my friends?" So I stopped eating meat at 15, and then when I was about 19, I stopped eating fish. So there's always just been that connection with animals, and also, of course, that's it's been a bit overshadowed at the moment with the pandemic, but it's just the ecological crisis that we're facing, and the Anthropocene that really is an overriding concern for a lot of us. So you have to address that in some way.
Absolutely.
Finding our connection with the natural world, and also in whatever way feeling the pain about what is happening to our environment.
And in some ways, your writing, when it reflects your concerns, can become a voice for those conservation efforts in a way.
Yeah.
So that's a really good point you brought up, actually, in general, about the sort of global pandemic crisis that we're in. What do you think the role is of a writer in these sorts of times?
Oh, I think the role of a writer is to be true to yourself, to be really true to who you are, and just express that truth through your writing. It's a matter of being sincere and being honest, I think, and sharing that with others, because there's so much falsification at the moment. There's so much absurdity. So I think you have to push back against that. I do that more in song. And I work with a musician and filmmaker, Gabriel White. We've got a group called The Floral, and our third album, which we published recently, is Gas Giant. And one of the songs in our album Gas Giant is Drum the Drums for Ubu. It's replaced with the letter U, but it's also about Trump, our rusted thug, our grub who munches through the cabbage leaves. Drum the drums for Ubu. Of course, Trump has got U in it. So it's based on the vowel U, but it's also an anti-Trump song. So I think as a role as writer, in some way, you don't need to be overtly political, but it's good to reflect what really strange times we've entered into.
Absolutely.
It's a very strange. It's just a very strange period of time. So whatever you write is going to reflect that in some way. Maybe very oblique, but still, it'll be there.
I like what you said about falsification. I think especially with the media, we have a lot of, as our friend Trump would say, fake news going around. How do you have, as a writer, how do you think you can make your voice and your work be heard above so much other? I mean, the amount of fake news stories and sort of sensationalized headlines that you have constantly rushing back and forth in both directions of the political spectrum. How do you think writers can sort of rise above that and still have a voice in a very, very complicated conversation?
again, I think just become, it comes back to being true to yourself.
Yeah.
Poetry and creative writing, it's a mystery. You don't explain everything, but for people who read you, people who like your work, it's just mining what's really mysterious about this world. So it's just fascist regimes, far right regimes, military regimes suppress the imagination.
Yeah.
They're always involved in censorship. And so as a writer, creative writer, you have to be a champion of the imagination.
Yeah.
There are certain things that just can't be explained by science, by religion.
Yeah.
Certain things that are just so intimate with being human. And that's, as a writer, you address. You address them in a way that taps into the emotions, that taps into the imagination. So people really need that. That's the importance of the writer. People need to tap into that creativity. So I think that's the important part.
Right. Yeah, that's really powerful. I think for a lot of people that creativity and that imagination often becomes suppressed as well. That's something that sort of a lot of people aren't in touch with. Do you think that as a writer, it is a hard and fast rule that there has to be this innate connection with your subconscious, do you think, or at least with your imagination?
I don't think there's any hard and fast rules for writing.
Well said.
Everything's up.
Yeah.
Everything's up for grabs. Okay, so imagine if the pen is your mind, like big mind. It's often called big mind.
Okay.
So just the ballpoint tip of the pen is the more rational part, the part that you put down to paper. But behind that, there's this vast mind, which includes everything, which includes mountains and rivers and stars, and the whole of history, all the great people in human history, all the people you've learned from in your life. This mind is so vast. And it needs that little tip, that sort of more rational part to get the stuff on paper. But behind that, the tip of the pen, there's all this other part, this 89% or whatever, that's behind that, which is vast and limitless. So as a writer, you connect with, in some way you connect with that greater mind, that bigger mind.
That's really fascinating. I absolutely love that example. And I suppose writing becomes a way for us to translate that, those bigger and more irrational ideas and put them down with pen and paper and turn them into something other people can connect with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's what I see as a role as
right. Oh, that's exciting. Way back at the beginning of our conversation, I just wanted to touch back on it. You talked about when you began writing poetry, you were very shy to begin with when it came to sharing that poetry. I think you said it was your uncle you began sharing it with.
Yeah.
How would you? What
Just
advice?
A few times.
Yeah. What sort of advice would you give to writers who share those anxieties around sharing their writing?
I talked about this a little bit with the creative fiction class at the university, because it's important when you're starting out as a writer. It's like developing a physical body. That's how I see writing. You have to have a body of work. So the most important thing is to keep writing, so that you feel like you've accomplished something, even if you don't share it. Just keep writing, because you'll always get more into it. And then at a certain point, you might have someone close to you that you can, start sharing with and get some feedback. And then the next step, of course, is joining a creative writing group, perhaps at university, doing a creative writing paper, which is great. That's what I did, because you have to produce work each week and you share it with others. You share it with your peers. So if you can make that step, if you can get accepted into a creative writing course, that's great. That's a real spur. So that was important for my development.
Yeah, right. And you said it was only after you took a creative writing course that you actually published work. Is that right?
Yeah, no, it's good. I was really glad that I didn't publish before that.
Yeah.
So I'm not, yeah. So well, all my 7 books, they're a bit like babies. Your babies go out into the world. So
Yeah.
I still like all my babies. I'm glad that they were brought into the world.
That's good to know. Yeah. Speaking of that, though, and your works as babies, I think most authors that put any kind of work out there that they're proud of are going to value it. How do you deal with criticism when you work really hard on something and you're really proud of it, and then it goes out there into the world and someone tramples all over it in a review or something like that? How have you sort of dealt with criticism?
I think it depends who's the critic. I think that's important.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm old enough now. I've got certain sensibilities, and sometimes people criticize your work, but they've got totally different sensibilities.
Mm.
Other times you can really learn from criticism. I'm sort of lucky that I can't even think of a book that I've published that's had a bad review. However, I've had books turned down by publishers. After I wrote my second book, which was with Waikato University Prison Network of Dissolving Threads, I did a very ambitious one called Emblemata Otherwise, which was all sorts of stories around strong images. And it got turned down by several publishers.
Mm.
They just thought it was too unconventional. And I'm always glad that book got turned down, because it had its defects, I realize now, but it had some good bits in it. And what I've done over the years, I've taken all the really good bits and put them into books that have been published. So I've had a few manuscripts turned down. I think that's fine too.
Mm.
It means that, perhaps that, every book has its own karma, its own destiny. And sometimes it's good that they're not published.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of the old saying, don't be afraid to kill your darlings.
Yeah.
But I like the recent twist I've heard on that, which is don't be afraid to cryogenically freeze them. Save those good bits, cryogenically freeze them, and put them somewhere else when the time comes.
Yeah, I also see them as seeds. They can be really good seeds in a failed work.
That's a great way of looking at
it.
Yeah.
Just pick out the good seeds and plant them in new soil.
Somewhere else.
And see it will grow. Yeah.
That's an awesome way of looking at it. Yeah. I'm going to remember that one, actually. That's cool. Yeah. Well, Richard, this has been an awesome conversation, and I think we're about out of time, so we'll draw it to a close very soon. But I want to ask you I love asking people this question.
Yeah.
No doubt you've had many interviews before and that sort of thing. I would love to ask you this question. What is a question that you wish you were asked more?
Well, that's a good one. Probably, who is it that writes?
Who is it that writes? Do you care to answer that?
I don't know. There you go.
That's a very interesting question. Could you tell me a bit more about the question? That sounds like something that really could prompt an interesting discussion.
Not really. Savor the question, who is it that writes? Who is it the one that writes? Who is the writer?
Do you think that's something that every writer themselves should be asking as they write?
It could be an interesting line of inquiry. For some people, it could be too zen.
Too zen. Yeah, a little bit too philosophical.
But who am I? Who am I? Who is the one that writes? Sort of a Zen question. And you realize when you look into it that you really don't know. Where do these ideas come from? Look into that. Where does this story come from? It's more like, where does this poem come from? Really look into that. Poem appears, you write a poem. Where did that poem come from? Sort of interesting.
That is. I'm glad I asked you that then. That's definitely something to reflect on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Richard, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. So thanks again for being a part of this.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay, go well and keep safe.
Yes, you too.
We are a people burning. We've been glared into ignition by skinny kids wearing uptown spit who came swinging out of dead-end corners. Kids who followed oil trails as if they were rainbows. Kids who sift through the debris of others just to find a smile. They make sparks of our indifference. And these embers are our pledge, forged in dawn oxygen, a promise to laser forgotten names into the skins of our story, then give ourselves to science as carbon fossils to be read. Right now, there are still too many who remain anonymous. Right now, what I do know is that dreams are flammable. What I do know is that there are still some smothering storms ahead. This generation has already amassed an impressive collection of charred memories, times when I felt like branding my back to the world, just so I could feel it spin, just so I could catch my ashes before they stutter drift to earth. But smoldering is not the same as dead. Despite all the hot air, we are still breathing. So when you see the writing on the wall, a discordant flare of unspoken lines, a stalled inner fire too long stifled silent. Burn loud. Let your echoes roar in the blood until we are a blazing people, tattooed with glowing names. Because this is not a void. This is the only stage we've got, and we must make it rumble.
Sand. Burned chicken and smoke from Riyadh's braaibuck is caught in my hair, washed for church tomorrow. He still shows off on the pavement stage. Yard mixes clop from the radio of his dented BMW. He sings loud, head thrown back, mouth wide open, and missing front teeth. The warm laugh of matriarchs, the fluid in their lungs a mix of humidity and cigarettes, and cheek kisses are perfumed by their lipstick, a color like wet henna. Inhaling the summer and choking, trying to swallow a decade at once. Walk to the sky gate with the memories scratching at your skin, the sand in your fake market Adidas slides. The boys I've grown up with. In the bright eyes of the future, their sons and daughters, I've watched boys I've grown up with grow up quickly, run into responsibility and a ruck for redemption. They catch all the joys in small hands and smiles. Illegally in the passenger seat, as we drove past resting red and blue lights, I've listened to boys I've grown up with confess. We sang directions through the Hamilton fog, a leitmotif of our inflammation, a lament of retired young people. While socks lounged on the carpet beside their bed, the air a marriage of sun and dust, I felt boys I've grown up with put their arms around me. Masters of Milo baristery, they make sugar taste like spare change in the strings of their bass guitar. The boys I've grown up with. Unsaid. By persuading me to stay for dinner, closing the door to your bedroom behind her, by leaving us. Is your mother okay with this? If you would meet my eyes, then I'd know what you think. Tap water real. We whisper over the piano keys, hiding behind E minor, and the feathers in my jacket are shaken, awake. I look at your knees and I wonder if the skin you are showing me is firm like omelette mushrooms, if you would let me bite. touch and a timer begins. I want to make you shiver, make you exhale slow, run my hands through your damp hair. I would spread my thoughts wide, massage my intentions, hum your name against your quiet shoulders. I swear I can hear you praying for it.
Fishing. Sprat fizz under the current like a school of ghost thumbs. I tie my hook to the end of the line, not a sinker, and cast into the lapping. We feed chicken liver to the sea like magicians with handkerchiefs and top hats. The sprats suck the bait from the jag, but keep their lips clear from the point. Limpets climb the concrete column, and the day rolls over and breathes out. Grandad buys us kahawai from the fish and chips store, and we watch the men stumble in their dinghies. We throw chips out to the gulls, and they catch them mid-air. My hands are coated in oil and loose on the reel. I am learning how to fish, how to let the line run out, how to be okay with it. Bury me with my reusable bags, black polypropylene and jute, netted cotton and thick countdown plastic. God will leave us to soften in the car boot or lie us flat on the kitchen table and instantly forget we exist. He will stand there at the self-checkout, juggling cantaloupe and kombucha, sea turtles and carbon emissions, the Pacific trash patch and arm cramp, shucking yet another bag from the hook. Mice. The noise in the ceiling started in June, when the ginkgo trees turned yellow and threw their leaves on the ground to rot. I'd hear it at midnight when it was just me and the television. The movie finished, the room lit up blue, then buzzed to black. My flatmate would hear it in the shower, scratching at the pipes. We googled murders on Knighton Road and found only ghosts of toga parties and O-Week brawls. We lit candles, sat on the ground and held hands. We searched for local exorcists. The websites all had pop-up ads like jump scares for our credit cards. We walked down to the warehouse in the orange lamplight, lay metal spring traps in the attic, lathered them with peanut butter, turned the television up. We don't believe in ghosts. There are many moments where 2 meters might have saved us. At dusk, the gnats turn gold and ghost the grass. I hear their winged humming like an electric miasma. I walk through the swarm with my chin up and my breath caught warm in my throat. I wear them around my shoulders like a shawl made of shiver and teeth. I pull them close and hope the men hear them and know to keep away. Disappearing disease. There is a bee graveyard behind our kitchen curtain. 15 winged bodies curled in the fetal position, fuzzy and grey and sunk on the white sill. We figure our flat is in the way of some ancient migratory course. We figure that while we go to work, they trail in through the latched window and buzz a slow circuit behind the netting. Too drunk on the student smells of Ajax and Lynx to realise they're drowning. They say that bees have been around since the Garden of Eden, that they are the servants of God. Their honey is ambrosia, the nectar of immortality, mead, a natural antiseptic, $11.99 a jar at Pack and Save. Some say that a bee circling a sleeping child signals a long and happy life. Others reckon that bees are the messengers of the dead. In the hive, select worker bees spend their lives as undertakers, removing the striped corpses of their cellmates. When you go to a funeral, you must tell the hive of your loss. You should repeat the news 3 times. You should make them a cup of tea and tell them gently. You should bring them back one of those little cucumber and tuna sandwiches. This weekend, 20 of them sailed into our kitchen while my flatmate cooked stir-fry. They kept trying to dive bomb the peanut sauce, and she kept yelling about how she wanted to kill them all. The slaps of the spatula hit the walls. We told her not to worry, that they were sure to add protein to her lunch, And, after all, stings help with arthritis later. Noodles stuck and burnt to the bottom of the pan, the whole room silver smoke. I imagined bees hitting the element and catching fire, flying, still flaming, burrowing under the carpet and smoking, turning our house to ashes. I grabbed a sticky McDonald's cup from the table and trapped a worker bee against the wall, slid a Pizza Hut flyer under the lip and shuffled her vertical until I could flip the cup. I shimmied the back door open with my elbow and held her above the cherry tomatoes. Each of these pieces have appeared in print thanks to the generosity of some very cool publishers. I'd like to thank them. Thank you to Nexus for publishing Fishing. Thank you to Jordan Hamill for including the piece Bury Me in his 2019 zine Halftime Oranges. To Poetry New Zealand Yearbook, who in 2019 published Mice. And to Paula Green, who recently published There Are Many Moments Where 2 Meters Might Have Saved Us on her website, New Zealand Poetry Shelf. And last but not least, to Landfall for publishing my essay Disappearing Disease in their issue 235.
Mirrors. Nan is holding baby. The little hands tutu with the power necklace. Nan pretends it doesn't hurt her neck. She turns away from the dresser. It's not good to let such young babies look into mirrors, she says. 6 years old. Large mirrors cover 2 walls in the bathroom. Her feet tiptoe on the little stool she used to sneak into the drawers and pull out Auntie's makeup to make a mess with on the counter. She stares into her own eyes, and they are no longer hers, looking from outside her body, and it is just like the empty nail polish bottles. Me? Skin, freckles, spiritless. As a teenager, she would sit on the floor and run the straightener along her fried hair. It smokes and sizzles. She can't count how many times she has burned her ears. The smoke rises above her head. She watches it dissipate and makes eye contact with herself again. Seeing her husk from outward doesn't have the same effect that it used to. Her elders swear that they have seen dead loved ones appear from behind their reflections. She only hears these stories through her mother. A friend once told her that some of their family cover mirrors at night, and even now she remembers this sometimes when she works herself up into fear of the dark during early morning hours, and she runs past the bathroom mirror with her head down when going to the toilet. The mirror in her bedroom, that once hung on the wall, now sits on the floor, propped against a shelf, grey with sticky dust, and the time between each special occasion for which she pulls it out gets longer and longer.
This is Richard von Sturmer, and I'm going to be reading 10 brief prose poems from a work in progress with the title Slender Volumes. And it's a collection of 300 prose poems. And the titles for each one are taken from Zen Master Dogen's 300 koan collection, the Shinji Sobogenzo. And the names and the titles are all Chinese Zen masters from the Tang Dynasty. And we'll begin with Quinglin's Dead Snake on the Path. While driving through the Arizona desert, we saw a sign for Rattlesnake Homestead. It turned out to be a bone-dry trailer filled with rattlesnake skins and skeletons. A recorded voice said, "If we're not here, we're out catching rattlesnakes." You could buy jewelry fashioned from fangs, rattles, and vertebrae. It was a sort of hell realm. Slipping out the door and sliding back to our car, we hissed to each other that we would never go there again. Linji's, have you sold it all? There was a dairy at the end of the road, owned by Mr. Moth. Everybody knew it as Moth's Dairy. He sold ice blocks made in a special mould, the stem being a popsicle with a large wing on each side. The ice blocks came in different colours and were named Emerald Surprise, Ruby Splendor, and, best of all, the Tiger Moth. The dairy always shut its doors at dusk. No fluorescent lights were switched on. Mr. Moth, light the darkness. Unions, this is it. This is it, what I am missing. The arrow that went beyond the target. This cry of life from two small lungs. This shot of morphine in the early hours. This sorrow, this window, what I am missing. This is it. This sparrow, this leaf, this bus that drives down a crowded street. Over and again, the immediate response. This bell, this clapper, this sundial, a line of radiance. This flower, this candle, what I am missing. This is it. Swansha hears the sound of a swallow. I know the footsteps of the sparrow walking on the tatami, wrote the haiku poet Hosei Ozaki. He was sitting still, and the sparrow came closer so that he could hear the faint sound of its clawed feet on the straw matting. Just a little distance from existence. That's where a writer needs to be. And in the realm of the imagination, which has its own operating principles, the verse could become, I know the footsteps of the sparrow walking in the mist. Fayans, you are Hui Chao. From the distant past, from a distant land, the message still gets through. I'm just me, and you're just you. There was that day, walking side by side, when we stopped by a waterfront restaurant. An ambulance had pulled up. Its blue light was switched off. People were standing around in tears, and a body was carried out on a stretcher. Heart, we each thought. He had a heart attack. Then we continued on our walk without saying a word. Bai Zhang's fundamental principles of the great matter. The size of the pancake depends on the size of the frying pan. The hot water jug switches off when the water has boiled. Mustard dripping on a napkin leaves a mustard-coloured stain. The roots of an ancient tree trip up the inattentive jogger. After a swim in the ocean, the apples taste crisper. The mushroom farm smells of nothing but mushrooms. Beneath the gold leaf, there is straw mixed with clay. Zhao Zhou's indestructible nature. Emperor Domitian would spend hours alone in his study catching flies, which he stabbed with a needle-sharp pen. One day a visitor asked if there was anyone with him, and his friend, the consul Lubius Crispus, replied, "No, not even a fly." The emperor was eventually stabbed to death by an assassin. A number of omens foretold his end, including a hurricane that tore off the inscription plate from the base of his statue and flung it into a nearby tomb. Jia Shans, there is nothing in front of you. Nothing to do. Nowhere to go. Spiders have spun their small webs around the door handles of a parked car. Each sentence ends with a full stop. Each poem begins with an open window. Basho wrote that once the moon had disappeared below the horizon, all that remained were the four corners of his writing desk. Why is a raven like that? I am unraveling into the world. My last thread runs along the edge of a feather and into the darkness. Long Ya's stone tortoise. Wait until a sparrow turns into an eagle. Wait until Mangere Mountain fits inside a shoebox. Wait until the Waikato River flows backwards and all the war canoes and gunboats resurface. Wait until the year of the zebra. Wait until your long-dead grandfather comes knocking on your front door. Wait until the dishevelled poet stumbles across Dante's lost manuscript. Wait with Master Longya until the stone tortoise speaks. And the last one, Wu She turns his head. When Amala came downstairs, I looked up from my work. Have you finished? She asked. Nearly, I replied. We're all writing towards the final line. Our house doesn't have an upstairs, not even an attic. Not that it matters. I should let myself go. I should let go of myself. The words have their own order. It's Saturday morning and there are scones to be baked. The bag of flour has puffed itself up and raisins are running about on the kitchen bench.
All right, hello and welcome everyone to the Young Writers Panel, which we are holding as part of the Virtual Writers Festival. We are honoured to be joined in conversation by three very exciting and talented up-and-coming writers. These are Liam Hinton, Maryana Garcia, and Meche Phillips. Welcome everyone.
Thank you.
Hi.
Welcome.
I think I'll start by just asking, how is everyone coping post-lockdown and how was everyone coping during lockdown? Did you keep writing during lockdown?
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I'm doing, this is the trick with Zoom, isn't it? You have to be careful you don't jump in on top of each other. But I'm doing a journalism course at the moment, so I had to keep writing during lockdown. Which I think was great because when you can't find, an internal motivation, it's always good to have an external one. So I enjoyed that because it gave me, it helped to put some structure into my days because I don't do very well without structure. And since then, yes, just keep writing.
I think same. Because of the university assignments, I had to keep writing, which was really hard at times, but once you have a habit, I guess you just keep writing.
Well, I'm a graduate and have thusly had no framework to motivate me, and I have accomplished nothing.
Fair enough.
I've had a couple cracks at writing, and I haven't tried to force it, even though I'm usually of the perspective that if you're not getting anything, just force it. But I don't really think I don't think anyone should be making any demands of themselves at the moment. Like it's an exceptional time, and yeah, so I've not really accomplished it. I've pivoted into doing music and other creative stuff to just kind of keep going, but nothing in terms of like original creative work, certainly not.
Yeah, definitely. So do you feel like there was sort of any added pressure? Like I know when I was, all the media around me was all these people getting into writing and all their hobbies. So did you guys feel there was sort of an extra pressure, like, oh, you've got nothing else to do, you should be writing? Like,
I think that I did feel a little bit of pressure to be productive. I don't know if it was so much specifically a writing kind of pressure or a creativity kind of pressure, but I did feel like the whole kind of I have no excuses not to be productive vibe that kind of fit into my thinking a lot, and what's great about having all these housemates is that they make me relax, so it's awesome.
Yeah, no, I agree. I did feel a little bit of like social media pressure to be doing something, and I didn't do anything really except uni work. But it's okay. I don't think it's fine.
Yeah, I think you definitely feel a pressure to kind of say something about it, like it's just such an extraordinary, unprecedented time that like as a creative you want to have some kind of unique kind of way to jump in on it, and you want to be the first person to kind of capture the zeitgeist of the time. But every time I sat down to write anything, I was just like, everything's shit, and not like in a unique way, like I'm not feeling anything different, or I can't elucidate that or illuminate it in any meaningful way. So I'm hoping that after this I can write about the kind of general nihilism of the time and whatnot, but as it stands, it's just like I don't feel like I have a way in or anything like unique to say about it currently. So, and of course you do feel pressure, and you're absolutely right, like the media is full of like just these short, BuzzFeed videos of people being like, I've taken up knitting, and like I've totally reinvented my life, and I got really fit, and it's all performative, and I think partially designed to make you feel shit for feeling shit. So I try my best not to kind of buy into it.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, that's
I've actually taken up knitting, so I'm feeling a bit insulted now.
I wasn't crapping on knitting. I actually think that sewing is great.
I was going to say though that you've grown a very, very nice beard since I last saw you.
I'm going for lighthouse keeper.
It's very, I was going to say it's quite impressive. So if on the positive note that you can count that as a lockdown accomplishment.
You could probably write a poem about it.
Yeah, that's really interesting how you guys say that structure and routine really helped you through lockdown, and Liam, you offer a bit of a different perspective on that.
Oh, I wish I had a structure and routine, because I think a lot of creatives are like this, that you're just kind of like wafy kind of people by nature, and without or at least I'm speaking for myself only here, but like if I don't have like rigid guidelines, I'll just kind of start to disappear off into the ether and accomplish nothing. Like I've done a lot of thinking, but like that's not really worth a whole lot,
Sorry, I was just thinking, jumping off what Liam said, just like the nature of creativity, right, is that you see all these possibilities, and then sometimes when you see all the possibilities, it makes it like, well, this is what I think anyway, you see all the possibilities and then it becomes too big to actually take any action. Yeah. So like structuring my day helps me to kind of narrow down what possibilities there are and be like, in this hour only so much is possible. Like so, yeah.
That's what is it? That's the kind of the terror of absolute freedom, right? The idea that you can do whatever you want, and that the spectrum of possibilities becomes its own immobilizing force in and of itself.
Do you guys think that having a creative outlet such as writing helped you during lockdown? And also, did you pick up any other new creative outlets outside of your comfort zone?
I was planning, originally I was planning that I would do more writing and I'd like exercise more. And then I ended up just like sitting in the same place in my room every day and painting. And doing like different, like I think expressing myself in a different way. This lockdown was like really good for me, and I didn't realize how much I enjoyed painting.
I think I've always been an overthinker, so and when you have time to think, that's a problem. So when writing did help me because I've had quite a few really great friends telling me for a while that I should try more free writing as a counterpoint to the overthinking, and that's what if there's something that I did do differently during the lockdown, I think that's what I did do. So I scheduled in a little bit of time in the morning to do some free writing, and it gave me time to just actually like recognize what I was thinking about and recognize what I was feeling. So I think that really did help. And aside from that, I've been taking more photos with my phone. I'm really not a selfie person. But I've been taking photos of different little things all over the house. Like, because the light comes in through all of these random windows in my house that I never noticed because I'm never home. So that's been great. I've come up with like a little series. I don't know if I'm going to do anything with it, but we'll see.
I think what it did for me, and like, yeah, the creative outlets helped. Like, it not necessarily the act of doing them, but the act of thinking about them. Like, I mean, you know, this will all be for naught if I don't follow through on it, but I was kind of coasting on having finished my master's. I was like, oh, cool, I finished my master's. I don't have to do anything immediately. Don't even worry about it. But like, it's been nearly, you know, like 10 months since then now, and I'm just running the risk of pissing away my early 20s if I don't start doing something very shortly. So it's at least given me the motivation to potentially go back and like find myself a framework, like do a PhD or something like that in a kind of creative field. And yeah, I think if anything, it's kind of like I was self-isolating. I know that everyone's been making that joke, but like I was self-isolating before this, and now that I've been kind of self-isolating in it, it's made me go, oh, okay, like this is what you have to lose. Like, this is why when the world opens back up, you'll go out and you'll actually do something, because the alternative is to just kind of sit on your potential and never actually actualize it, you know?
Definitely. So do you guys think that sort of literature in general will play a bigger role in this sort of new world that we're coming into? Like, do you think that this time has made writing more important?
I think that writing is always an overflow. And I think that what we've been having a lot in the past few months is like build up. So I'm kind of keen to see what that overflow looks like.
Definitely.
I was having a chat with another one of my friends, and she and I were talking about how, you know, the Renaissance came after the Black Plague, or well, I'm not exactly that accurate on that history, maybe, but that's what we were thinking about, you know. So if there is going to be a Renaissance after this, I'm really keen to see what shapes it takes, and I do think that literature will have a lot to do with that.
Definitely. I guess, yeah, on that note, like, it just makes me think about how sort of we, you know, like when I think back to past historical events, how we've framed them in literature. So to think, I want to know, right, how are they going to talk about this in the future, and are they going to see so many things that we don't see now, you know, like, it'll be really interesting when we start to see it from that perspective, and we can say, oh, I lived that, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, there's, I think people look for, I mean, this is not a unique insight, but like, people kind of look for answers, or not necessarily spiritual guidance, but just like a kind of a hermeneutic through which to kind of decode the symbols around them in literature and art in general. And like, I mean, I reread Camus' The Plague, for instance, over this, you know, just to kind of like get my head around what was happening, you know. So I think that art will always serve that purpose. I think what it will do ultimately, like in a lot of art forms, particularly like stuff that has like more traditionalistic associations, like, you know, high literature, or like cinema's been having the same issue, is that it's kind of it's rendered the old modes of distribution obsolete, for instance. So I think we'll be seeing a lot more kind of shifting into the digital spectrum, where like you won't necessarily need an agent to represent you or this guy. I think you're going to see a lot of people who are like self-made, or the modes through which they are receiving payment aren't as simple as my book goes into the store, somebody buys it, I get 2 cents, the other guy gets $20. It's going to be, I think it's going to totally rejig the kind of modes of distribution, and that's been a long time coming for every kind of art form, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And this pandemic will really push us sort of over the edge. I mean, even this festival, right? It's had to turn into a virtual festival because of the pandemic. And, you know, that's something that hasn't really been done that much, but we're going to see a lot more of that.
And I think that the art industry will learn, but like traditionally industries on a whole are very reluctant to change. Once they find a model that suits them, that they can milk, they'll just kind of, they'll sit in that for as long as humanly possible. And, you know, it's, you know, long live the new flesh, you know, everything's changing, and it's going to have to evolve or die along with it. You know, if we still want to have, you know, an arts industry.
Do you think literature has the power to keep people connected in the age of social distancing?
Yes, I think it always has, and it always will be keeping people connected. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we found ourselves sort of creating this festival in the midst of a global crisis. And the question we had to then ask ourselves was, why is art important to people? Why is it important to keep festivals such as this continuing?
I think it's because it's about stories at the end of the day. And we'll always have stories, and we'll always want to share them, because human beings are human beings, and we're storytellers, I think. And so one of the main ways to tell stories is through words. And I think that with language, people always need literature more than any, like, they'll need literature to share and tell stories, and also to help us, because I think that not only will literature be helping people to think about this particular pandemic and the moment we're living in history, but also about what we've learned from this time. Because I know about you guys, but what I've learned on, you know, lockdown has had nothing to do with viruses, but everything to do with myself, the people around me, and that in itself is going to be ripe for literature to share around and to express, I think.
Yeah. I definitely, to clarify my previous comment, I definitely don't think that art is going anywhere, certainly not, because it's the only, especially in a time like this where it's just like devastating isolation and ennui at best. Like, it's like art is the only thing that can cut through that fucking, just that blankness, you know. It's the, like, I haven't been writing anything myself, but I've been reading and watching just like at an insane rate, because it's just, it is the kind of, I mean, it's not a substitute for human connection. I certainly don't want to frame it like that, but it's, I don't know. I think you do end up feeling like you exist in relation to something else through art, you know, like, and I do think it's going to be hugely important and hugely going to keep people together, you know? Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So we might move on to sort of, this is the most exciting sort of part that I'm interested in asking you guys, is sort of what it means to be an up and coming writer in New Zealand. So I just wanted to know sort of, how do you guys get published, and what are your tips for people trying to get published?
Just keep writing.
Yeah.
I think that's the first thing. I think that, first of all, it's important to have a healthy mentality about your writing. Because, that means that no matter how many times you get a no, it'll be about the writing and not about you personally. And I think that's a really important thing to have, because you should never let the people saying, no, your piece isn't right for this publication at this time, turn into a no to me as a whole human being, because that will mean that you stop enjoying writing, which is, not very, which is counterproductive. I think that it's important to always try to, maybe not enjoy is the right word, because sometimes, you're working through something tough. But I think that it's important to just keep writing and to have a healthy mentality about that. That would be the first thing.
And for you, Shay, do you have any points to add to that? So how did you first get published? And it's called, but
it was during high school, and my English teacher had suggested that I enter a writing competition, and so I did. And I think ever since then, I've always tried to look for try to write regularly, because I think that even though there are competitions and there are things that you could enter and ways to get published, it's more about, for me, it's more about developing my skill and the way I express myself, I think. And I find writing to be very therapeutic, so I'll write a whole lot of things that never get anywhere or I never share with anyone, just because it's therapeutic. But yeah, definitely having the right mentality when you do want to share your work is really important, like Maryana said.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I really agree with that.
I'll preface this by saying that any advice I give is entirely hypocritical, because I've been sitting on top of an entire manuscript, 150 pages of poetry for over half a year, and I've ostensibly done nothing with it. But I think I definitely agree that it's very difficult, because all art is inherently about personal expression, and therefore you are you're putting a part of yourself out there, and it's like asking somebody out on a date, right? Getting rejected, that hurts every time, and no matter how kind of hardened or kind of steeled you become to that kind of feeling, and how how many times you think you've numbed yourself to that kind of but every time you get a no, you come back and think oh, okay, what the hell's wrong with me? And there's so many reasons why a certain person or a certain journal, anyone, there are thousands of pieces of art that I could say that are just my favorite pieces of art ever, and I could sit them down in front of somebody else and they could just have no reaction to it. It's just it's just too kind of effervescent to kind of bottle. It's kind of yeah. And I would also say it's obviously great to get published, that's what we all want, but remember why you started in the first place, right? You probably didn't start to get published, or you didn't start for the money, and if you did, you made a mistake, because everyone who's ever made money off of their writing has either had to die first, or has just had to compromise so much of themselves in the process. It's obviously a huge generalization, but you I would like to think, if you put me, on a desert island completely alone with nothing but a typewriter, I would write because I had to, even if they're I know the Greeks talked about how there's no point producing something if it isn't to then have an audience, but like Michelle said, the act of it itself is therapeutic, and there is obviously something hugely therapeutic about getting to share that self, and a lot of people, I think, write to be accepted in a pretty direct sense, a lot of my poetry is just here's all the screwed up things about me, do you still like me? But at the same time, I think that like, I think that everyone on this panel, at least, like, you write because, like, it's physical. You have to, you know, like, it starts to, like, screw with your physiology if you don't, you know?
Yeah, and sorry, just adding to that as well. Like, I think that the key really is, and I think I'll preface it with the same preface that Liam has. This is a bit hypocritical, like, because I'm a kind of OCD organized, like, person, that kind of person, and I have to-do lists. My to-do lists have to-do lists. But I think that what's also important about writing is precisely, not to write to be published, but write to be a better you. Like, write as yourself, I think, is really important, because and the more you write as yourself, the more you write as who you bring who you are to your writing, and the more you write like that, the more you'll find places and times and other people that fit and that match. And that's when publication happens, as kind of a byproduct of your personal journey. Because, and I think that for me, I'd like to say, you know, like, maybe if I look down into the future, I'd like to be able to turn around and be like, I'm really proud of every single piece of writing that I've written, because that's me, 100%. Not because, oh, that was really clever and they liked it, but because that was really, like, this body of work is me. And that, I think, is more important. Like.
And then it's interesting with that, because what you're saying, you know, because then the rejection hurts so much more when you're putting these pieces through, because they are a part of you. But yeah, definitely.
Sometimes, at least for me, I couldn't even write with the idea of somebody else reading it in mind. Like, to get to where I wanted to get for my manuscript, I had to dig pretty deep to a place where I couldn't really let any self-consciousness in. And I'm an incredibly anxious person, you know, like, it's not so, like, I had a mini heart attack when Liam told me the other day that he'd read the first few poems of my thesis on the online library, and I was just like, oh God, you know, like, because I went back and reread a lot of it in preparation for this, and I was like, oh God, like, you'd almost want to publish it under, like, a pseudonym or something like that. So I think don't come at it with publication being your goal, because you're going to restrict the parts of you that you're willing to put up on the you know, plate.
If you guys do this too, do you ever write, so you write something for you, right, and then you hear that someone else is going to read it, and do you ever reread it trying to think from their perspective of what other people would think of your work, or is that just me?
I have a policy of not doing that, but I've had to make it like a policy. Like, I have a policy about when somebody writes me back with a no, if I've sent something in and I've tried to find a place for this piece of myself, when somebody sends back a no, I don't read over my work again until, like, a week after I've got the no. And then I hardly ever let myself make changes, even if they've given suggestions. I'm like, no, that's not this. It's just not the right time and place, but it doesn't mean that it's the wrong poem. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Yeah.
I really like that, what you guys are saying about not writing for fame or for ego or to get published, but
I definitely write for ego, but it's like a closed loop. It's me and me exercising my own ego.
100%. My mom will tell you, she's still got, like, some random little story I wrote and illustrated when I was, like, 5. Something about a duck crossing the road and, like, making turns. I'm like, that could be really, if you analyze that now, I mean, like, what could that say about my 5-year-old psyche? I don't know, but.
I think I went back a couple years ago and reread the first thing I ever submitted anywhere. I think I would have been, like, 8 or something like that, and it was to some Rotary competition in Thames or something like that, and I grew up in Thames, for context, and it was like a kind of flash fiction before flash fiction thing, and it was like a 100-word kind of short story, and I wrote it about a jewel thief who has like finally got to it, and he's like so transfixed with it that it paralyzes him. You know, he's like in awe of it, and I don't know. And I kind of looked back on it, and I was like, oh, that's like a step up from my prose now.
Yeah.
There's a reason I stepped over into poetry. I'm no good at prose.
I think I was interested to ask you guys was whether you think writing specifically for a New Zealand audience limits your ability to reach an audience internationally. Like Liam, in some of your poems, Fish, I think it was, you write about listening to Golden Horse on cassette and playing swing ball. Maryana, you write about being the grassroots kids. And Meche, you're writing about driving through the Hamilton fog and Milo baristery. I mean, international audiences aren't really going to understand most of those references. Do you ever think about that while you're writing, or is it just something that doesn't cross your mind at all?
I don't think it crosses my mind at all. It's a bit like Maryana said. When you write something, it's just 100% you in the moment at the time. So I don't really think about anything after what I've written or where it's going to go, really, how far it'll go.
Yeah.
I'll be honest and say that sometimes it does, but I try not to let it change anything. So I try to really do the first, because I overthink everything. So, so I try not to. Sometimes it will probably filter in there. But usually I go, okay, I'm not looking for an audience. I'm looking for the words, right? So if the words fit, then they fit. And I'm not going to try to make something else fit in that hole.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because it definitely crosses my mind as well. But I can't think of a way that I would kind of mitigate that and still be genuine. Like swap out Hamilton for LA. Like it wouldn't be very genuine. You know what I mean? And I mean, I read work that comes from other places. You know what I mean? I think that. I think it does restrict you and pigeonhole you, you know, like the New Zealand literature scene is like pretty compact as it stands, but like geography's starting to mean less and less in the digital age. And I think that quite paradoxically, ultra specificity is a way in, you know. I whenever I'm reading, you know, because I'm always looking for a way to get out of my own perspective. I think it's just incredibly healthy to do so, especially if you're like a middle-class white guy. It's pretty important to like try to engage with other experiences and stuff like that. And those extremely specific kind of references, you can Google it, you know, like it's not like, and I get that, you know, just knowing stuff isn't the same as relating to it, but I think it's a way in, you know, and I think it's really, really important. And like, I think there's particularly from my perspective, there's interesting insights one can have about New Zealand. Like I've always tried to kind of highlight the kind of toxicity of our kind of masculinity in our culture and stuff like that. Like I just think that there's meaningful work to be done here, you know, in our kind of literature. There's ideas that we need to explore on our own doorstep. And like, I wouldn't begrudge anyone setting a novel anywhere else. I mean, I would absolutely set anything anywhere. Like, I'd never let it restrict me. But at the same kind of token, if a story came to me and was like, I'm set in New Zealand, I wouldn't go, no, you're not. You know, you're set in Miami. You know, it's hot. You know, cool shit happens there.
Yeah,
and I think because I know I moved to New Zealand quite like oldish, I guess. I was 13, so I love New Zealand. So I think that if the people who live in New Zealand don't write about the New Zealand experience, then who's gonna write about the New Zealand experience? Like, I think that there's a lot in New Zealand as well to celebrate. That nobody else is celebrating.
And I wouldn't say it's typical kind of Kiwi poetry or writing, you know what I mean? Like, and I don't write landscape poetry, you know what I mean? Like, I think obviously it's coming from experiences. So, you know, if your experiences are grounded in your geography, then absolutely that's going to show up. But I don't know. I think it's kind of inevitable and good that what a New Zealand writer is, the understanding of that is going to expand.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was interesting because when I first sort of thought about that, I'd written something and I sort of posted it on my little Instagram page that I made for my poetry.
Which is awesome, by the way.
Thank you. It had the word whakapapa in it, and I just didn't think about it. And then I posted it, and I thought about like all the people that were following me and how they were all most of them were from like America and stuff. And I was like, is no one going to understand that? You know? So it's yeah, but I understand. Yeah, if we don't do it, who else will? I think that's a really good point. Definitely. So I wanted to also ask you guys, so what do you think is unique? What else is unique about New Zealand writing, particularly in comparison to sort of the rest of the world? Are there any features in it that you sort of notice, or what are some regular, you know, topics or anything that you think come up a lot?
In my personal experience, I think, and look, we're on a journey, so we're not yet all there. But I think that's something that New Zealand writing could, I guess, I don't know if this is the right word, but could take advantage of more. Or like, yeah, something that New Zealand writing could use to enrich itself more is just the diversity in New Zealand. I mean, if you look at us, like we're like, this is already like, you know, like we're all from very different like background. Everyone's got a different life and a different story to share. And I think that that's what makes it beautiful. Like if we try to make ourselves like anybody else, then that's just doing a disservice to our own writing. I think that it's precisely what's so beautiful about New Zealand is that we can write, to an extent, we can write whatever we want, and we can, you know, like just be ourselves, and that's really huge.
Definitely. Any other thoughts on that one?
Do you want to jump in, Michelle?
No, you can go.
Okay, well, I think there's a lot of like New Zealand stuff. Like I think the references obviously are like, they work perfectly, but I think we've got, I'm a theatre guy, so I'm a huge fan of like acting and theatre and stuff. And there is just like the kind of like, it was not quite a patois or a Creole or anything like that, but just like what we've done to English is fascinating. And there's this, particularly from some of the points that I've been writing from, just like there is a brutality to the way that like the slang that men use in our country that just like absolutely sears when you put it down on the page. Like if you read something like Foreskin's Lament or something like that, there's some awesome shit that you can do with New Zealand scenery. And I think often like we use our beautiful scenery to kind of mask the undercurrent of violence within our society, you know, be that like racial inequality or, you know, wealth inequality or any, you know, sexism, you name it. Like we kind of have this kind of like, look at the Pahutakawas, ignore the violence, you know, and I think that you can play with that symbolic ground in really meaningful ways. Like there's like, I mean, it's not New Zealand, but there's like a shitload of great crime films that come from Australia, you know, that do similar things, you know. So no, I think there's tons of cool, like, every culture cultivates its own unique kind of symbols, and those have kind of different applications within kind of like literature. Like, for example, what I just said before, like the Pahutakawa tree has so many immediate evocations for any of you, right? Like it's even the kind of things like the summer Christmas is buzzy to people in other places, you know, like there's stuff you can do with, you know, our little place, you know.
Definitely.
I agree with that, and I agree with what you said about the language, because I always think if I had stayed in South Africa and if I hadn't moved here when I had moved here, like how different my writing voice would be. Because I think I'm very much like into and like in on the New Zealand way of speaking. And I think that comes through in what I write as well. Yeah, it's great.
I also think that what's great about New Zealand writing is that we haven't, I mean, in comparison to other places around the world, our tradition is still, our writing is still quite new. So we haven't got so many super entrenched patterns that we feel that we have to follow. And I think that is great. We're in a kind of, every single writer in New Zealand today could probably call themselves an innovator, you know, an explorer, something new, which is always exciting.
It's interesting.
Awesome. Well, I think that is a good place to wrap this up. I'd like to thank you all again for joining us. It's been really exciting to listen to you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
When we were told we only had 48 hours to evacuate the halls, the first thing I did was down my bottle of Fireball whiskey, then bought a plane ticket. When the RAs came up and informed us on the total alcohol ban a moment later, I nodded along as my mind drifted to the 3 bottles of vodka, 1 bottle of Jameson, box of gin and tonics, 4-pack of chocolate shots, and hip flask full of I can't even remember what in my wardrobe. I'm not an alcoholic. It's just sometimes you get so lost in your mind and decide that you're going to write out the end of the world in a university hall and that you'd spend the money at the bar anyway and that the liquor stores were all going to be closed for the foreseeable future. I can't be held responsible for the actions I had that night. Climbing into the attic, hiding the doll, reading poetry to a boy I hadn't ever really talked to before, getting a mullet, the girl on my bed as the RAs walked past, getting an eyebrow slit, drunk chats in the common room when everyone sensible had gone to bed, sitting on the floor of her room, breaking the isolation to attempt and fail at stealing a street sign, swimming in the fountain. It's amazing what we'll do when all hell breaks loose and we are suddenly slammed in the face with the realization that these people who are now my family and this place, which now feels like my home, I may never see again in the same context, and that 4 weeks could turn into 4 months. Packing bucket lists into evenings and drinking into the early afternoons, we existed for all that we were worth as a future we had so perfectly imagined crumbled 6 feet under the ground. How do I express the sadness of seeing all my friends leave for their childhood homes? How do I express the feeling of getting on a plane to leave behind what I had spent the last 3 years of my life dreaming of? How do I express the melancholy that comes with leaving people behind you never even got to create a friendship with because you never even made it to that stage? How do I express the feeling of forward motion robbing me of my goodbyes? How do I express the heartache that comes with having everything you've ever wanted and feeling finally like you are where you're supposed to be, only to have it all ripped away? When 4 weeks is as long as I've known these people, another 4 of separation piled on top starts to suffocate the relationships and makes them susceptible to crumbling out of existence. We are all grieving the life we are expecting to have and trying to navigate the waves of a new destination which feels so close to the past. It threatens to suck us back in like a whirlpool. I don't want to stop knowing you all.
The page is a mirror, so take a closer look. See her lean against the windowsill, rest her chin on her palm, tilt her head to one side, look up at you. Remember the nights you did the same, under the inky sky. Smoke a spliff, see the orange end burn in the dark, watch the arc of the butt tossed from the window, hear it hiss on the grass. Look closer at her crush on the window seat, next to her, hear the laugh of the girl with the messy hair you met at the flat with the boy you tolerated for sex. Hear her tell herself, I'm not in love with a girl. Stop. Look at the page. See her reflected up at you. Write a scene where she fucks a stranger in a stairwell because semi-public sex is always more thrilling. Have her forget his name, like the time you never asked his. Let him fuck you even though you're dry. Go home in a taxi to cry. Now punish her. The character, the reflection, the girl looking up at you from the page with the same eyes as you. Read the first draft, edit out the bad erotica, struggle through the midpoint, have her lie on a towel, touch herself, skin wet from the shower. Remember when the touch of another would repulse you, make you sick, but don't you dare have her raped. Look in the mirror at the page and protect her.
Waikato, my name is Jordan Hamill, and this poem is called The 10 Phases of the Moon. Brackets, I realise the moon only has 8 phases, but this poem has 10 stanzas, and I'd written it before I googled phases of the moon. Anyway, why do you care? What are you, a fucking astronomer? Closed brackets. 1. You once told me you'd strangle every public servant on Lambton Quay with their own lanyard. 2. Stuck in a downpour, LinkedIn requests and almond milk, empty a cement mixer onto me, cover me in chronic and call me Kiwiana. 3. Being in love with you is like having a fetish for the phases of the moon. Drown me in your lunar tides, Daddy, slip me that sweet crescent style, then leave me unseen for 26 days. 4. You told me trying to make art in a city perpetually satisfied with itself is like throwing a pigeon amongst the pigeons, or a cat amongst a collective of animals with no discernible food chain relationship. 5. I still keep your letters in my shoes. Paper cuts between my toes as I walk, reminding me never to get too comfortable. Reminding me I've always been comfortable. 6. You told me city dwelling isn't a virtue. Whanaungatanga paved over with vape shops and barkers' suits. You told me to find you where the Prestial Painonga ends. 7. Never underestimate my ability to see myself in your motivations. 8. If you told me we had to live on an island, I would drain the surrounding ocean and gentrify the coral reef. 9. Love is life's most urgent appointment, bright and full of hope until it's not. Like winning a Yui Boom from a Facebook competition that only plays John Campbell reading out the exact date and time of death, or finding your dad's Tinder profile. 10. Now I spend my days wandering southern farming stations, elbow deep in homemade cheese scones and unforgiving livestock, looking for the energy you always wanted for me.
I won't say sorry. I won't apologize for the villain you became in my story, the worst one of many, the one that pretends to be a hero. You bought everyone out. No cost was too high. My blood, you collected it as you cut precisely along the wound you helped me stitch up just weeks before. First, with surgical scissors, you snipped each stitch, still fresh in the skin. Then, the nylon holding the threads of my muscles together. Finally, you flexed the wire cutters and snapped the metal strings wrapped tight around my split sternum. You dipped your fingers in my open chest cavity and drew a diagram of how there was no possible way I heard you right. You drew 2 columns to explain our conflicting definitions of the same words. You asked if I understood. I was too scared to move, afraid a piece of my rib might slip into my left ventricle. So you moved to where you could look into my eyes and waited for me to congratulate you. I couldn't speak, so I smiled and the pink foam bubbled out from between my teeth. You nodded and wiped your gloved hands on a blue sterile towel, satisfied that all had been put right, put back the way you had found it. I used to think I would break if I didn't have you, and it turns out I was right. But what I didn't realize is I can just hold my chest cavity together with one arm and keep running. Will you marry me in Marina? Will you marry me in the sand, in the dirt, engraved in the mud? Will you marry me in the rain, running scared in soaked jeans and a useless purple hoodie? Will you exchange vows in the sticks with stones? Can we get a pastor to preside in the blinding dark that hides trenches and jellyfish guilt? Can we exchange chamber rings in the wind with knotted hair? Will we honeymoon in Normandy or Omaha? Spend every morning combing for shells? Will you marry me in burning logs on the crumbling cliffs of sand dunes in Fort Ord? Will you marry me in dead windows on decomposing buildings before they blow away?
Ghost octopus. I tendril toward what intrigues, examine the sunk litter treasures, a bottle to hide in, a jaw full of teeth. Slink between crevices, warmed by underwater volcanoes, immune to the crush of metaphor, each of my eyes bigger than your head, to pick up every hint of lost light in soft drifts. The cave is too small for my beak now. Feel away to the next phase, and the mouth of a limpet-lined gigantic bivalve is a gap to swell into. This for me is success. I award myself a gold bangle encrusted with purple cones that twist to face the current. My touch is legion. 8 arms examine your vocabulary. This intelligence they call alien. I say oceanic. I glide forward in the blue-black deep where your instruments can't reach. My Neanderthal ancestress gave me the genes for short alleles in the brain that alarm easily, a brilliant imagination for monsters and moods that swing with the sun. In winter she instructs me to eat enough for 3 men, then sleep out the worst of it in a cave made of duvets. She's better in emergencies than she is at gardening. That daily accretion of details seems like drowning in your own life. She sizes up the competition and notes the exits. I see through her eyes the new creatures, like people but out of focus, speaking so fast it makes her friends spit. But look at the dance they fashion out of the hunt, low whistles and hand signals, those bright stone blades. She has art and song and muscle that aches to move. In the pace of her breath she can feel what they're thinking. The future rolls downhill. It's time for her to choose. Jump or fade into the cracks left by mammoths. Maybe today she'll carry over the rock with a charcoal drawing of an owl transformed into a full moon to the ones who stay back with the camp. She'll bring berries and begin to clear the track to Homo sapiens, throw her gifts in the mix, and slink through generations to me, woken at night by the calls of strange beasts. Birds babble, clouds spill secrets. As I flash between joy and death and the need to touch everything, my Neanderthal ancestress runs my fingers over your face. The screech in my head is the roof breaking. I like the old me 1,000 times more. Struggle to pronounce my own name in a skin that's 2 sizes too big for this blonde room. Fail all over the pages of a pristine colouring-in book. Body stutters, signals a lack of activity in the brainstem. Every touch aches, so stay still to stay safe. But then it's only you and the voices, and they get creative. I'm burning up. The rage weighs more than a car, fits in my chest. Smashing windows is easier than living with insecurity, the unknown sprinkled on ice cream. Anxiety ashes up the carpet. Stories collapse, despite the work each day of blowing them up. All the air in the sky is not enough to keep this heart inflated. So I cut the kiss short, laugh at broken branches, and pray for meteors to come, solve our problems for us. A winter after. Rain falls like bickering. Out your window, the grey city bends its head under cover. Birds hide in thick branches. People slouch round tables and complain. When the sky starts to lift and soft sun colours in the street, your storm carries on in private. How long can you be sad before the molecules of grief degrade your grin into a split-second lightning flash, then dark again? How long can you balance down the strip of carpet between bed and work, steps of getting ready counted off on fingers that go limp between each digit, but you drag yourself along the habit line, too scared of what's on either side to even look? How long can you answer, "I'm okay," before the screw that keeps your jaw on works loose, oiled by the lie you use because you're bored to death of explaining? Or worse, you'd have to stay still while some fool tries to fix what you've already applied the whole wisdom of the internet to. How long? Much longer than you think. So much longer than you think. Hold on.
Hi, this is Mark Houlahan. So I wrote this poem about a year and a half ago, and the poem definitely comes with a sadness warning or a sadness rating. So I just wanted to reassure people listening to this recording that I didn't write the poem in lockdown and that the poem doesn't directly reflect a desperate state of mind on my behalf. So the poem is called Lethe. And it comes with an epigram. The poem was sparked from this story I read in the Waikato Times where there's this wonderful, awful comment. Drowning is a silent killer, and you will not hear them go. Lethe. Wind blows from land today, bearing dirt, regret, last night's takeaway wrappings to the sea. A far-out hand waves to shore as last farewell, undulating like a lazy palm tree swept by tropical breezes. Deftly slipping below the flat surface of the waves, for drowning is a silent killer, and you will not hear them go. Virginia leaves her last note on the dress of her linen, weights her cardigan's pockets with stones, slips aging feet into sensible shoes, steps out from Monk's house down the River Owls. Beyond the bend she steps once, twice into the flow. She holds her breath well, as she did when she was an empurpled, angry girl. Over the head, the war, the Germans, her last failed novel, her attending husband, all float away. The noise of the world comes not near her now, for drowning is a silent killer, and you will not hear them go. The river swirls dark green past the beach. The jetty, unsafe with its unstained wood and rusting nails, makes a fitting launching pad. Leap to the strongest flow where the wildest taniwha live. Tumble, 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 tumble in the middle stream. Stretch out now as if to snooze in the druggy heat of this late summer day. You have a long, long way to float downstream. Warm days and soundless nights to get there. Slow motion arms and legs touch logs, fish, condoms, needles. Detritus from the city above the banks. You may open your mouth only to drink in the river that owns you now. Rest easy as you slip into your long sleep, for drowning is a silent killer, and you will not hear them go.
Well, welcome back, everybody. My next segment is in conversation with Michael Steven, author of Walking to Jutland Street, which came out in 2018, and most recently his latest collection of poetry, The Lifers, which came out in March of this year. So welcome, Michael. Thank you very much for choosing to be a part of this.
Thank you for having me along, Brad. Yep.
Alrighty. Well, we were just chatting earlier before I hit record about sort of your journey before becoming a poet. You mentioned you went to MIT and did a little bit of script writing there. I guess I'd love to just know, how did you jump into poetry in the first place? What sort of got you started?
I started writing poems, I think, really bad poems. When I was a teenager, probably, like every teenager goes through it. I had a couple of English teachers at the secondary school I went to that pointed me in the direction of some poets, and one in particular who took the lyrics of Bruce Springsteen's song Thunder Road and typed them out on a A4 foolscap and gave them to me as a poem.
Right.
So, you get pointed in the direction of things like that, or things turn up and start something, eh? And then from there, I'd always been interested in kind of lyrics of, I grew up listening to like Run DMC and Beastie Boys.
Yeah.
The Pixies, that sort of stuff. You have uncles that turn you on to Bob Dylan and Hendrix and things like that. So it's like this well is being filled up with lyrical kind of stuff your whole life, eh?
Yeah.
So I probably didn't really think about poetry too much after I left school really early and went to work as an electrician.
Oh yeah.
And I was thrown into this sort of world of men working and drinking and going out and listening to music and all that sort of stuff. And you meet a lot of interesting characters on construction sites and things like that. Autodidactic people, that's a really good place, I guess, to become a writer, because you get attuned to the way that people speak. Like it was the conversations those men had with each other, I think, is sort of like the first poetry that I probably ever heard, eh?
Right, yeah.
Aloud. And then I was really interested in kind of like crime novels and things like that when I was young, as well. So I tried to be a crime novelist, like, until I was in my 20s. And then I had this flatmate who said to me one day, "You should write poetry. You can't write a prose sentence or something." And I was
right. So he put it to you pretty straight.
Yeah, basically. And that was a long time ago. And I just sort of kept chipping away at writing poems ever since, while trying to learn how to do other forms of writing, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me a little bit like you've sort of drawn from very everyday life experiences, such as the way people talk or the music we listen to, and you've sort of found the poetry in those places.
I don't have a sort of demarcation or tier system of what I think is high culture and low culture.
Yeah. Okay.
You know what I mean? Like it all is this one continuum. So I think I don't know. That's the stuff. Your subject chooses the person that writes about it. Like it's not really, you don't have any control over it. It's an obsession or something.
Yeah. No. I see where you're coming from. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah. Someone told me many years ago to write about the things that keep you awake at night.
That's cool. I like that. Yeah.
I have attributed that to a person, and I said to them, "I remember you told me this," and they said to me, "Oh, I don't think I did." They're another writer, right? And an older sort of writer, and they can't remember saying it to me. But I have this very clear picture of them telling me that. But it's something I've always tried to do.
Yeah. No, that's a really cool quote.
So, but there's a lot of wonder in the sort of, the everyday world.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So you said you left school and became an electrician. Have you
I
found?
went to work as an apprentice electrician for a really big company that they did the Sky Tower and and all these buildings around. You're just a grunt basically. Like building the pyramid or something, eh? But
yeah.
But it was okay. It was good. Like I don't regret that as being my kind of like of doing that instead of going to university straight.
Yeah. And do you find that there's many crossovers between that and writing poetry, or are they very different fields?
What do you mean? Electricity. Yeah. There's a guy called Charles Olson who wrote this essay called Projective Verse, and he talks about like how a poem has to move from one point to another point, eh? Like it's always got to be moving. And when I read that essay, even though like to me when I read it, I didn't have any sort of like heavy education in poetics or the philosophical kind of work that he was drawing on. There was something that sort of I knew how energy moves in an electrical circuit.
Yeah.
So therefore, a poem kind of like was a bit like that, eh?
Right. That was
the words themselves, the line breaks, the punctuation are sort of like parts of a circuit.
Well, I've read a few of your poems, and I've found that there tends to be this common theme of geography in a lot of your in a lot of your poems, in the sense that you're very specific in the way you reference certain streets, certain places.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about your choice and being very specific about those places?
That's a really interesting question. Place. I can't, particularly in the writing I've done over the last 10 years, like before that was kind of, I tried to write quite abstract sort of poetry, but more and more place becomes, I don't know, I can't have a poem unless it's tethered to a place. Quite often it is that just going to that place or something that throws up the whole poem. But I don't know. I write poems about, if I encounter things that I'm reading, I'll read about a place. So, I'll imagine something happening at that place. It's not always autobiographical. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's more just an anchor to a certain point.
It's more like a place is more like a character, right?
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the place is the character, right?
Yeah. Could you tell us a bit more about that? I like that.
Well, I don't know. I like looking at. I like reading narratives where the whole place is embodied and like alive. I don't know. I don't like sort of the still life in poetry. I like all the stuff that's going on in a place, like the grit and gunk and kind of sounds and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, the stuff that people might overlook or
but often that's where reality is, isn't it? And that's in a lot of cases what people forget about.
Maybe. I think reality. But I don't know. That's my sense of reality. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So your second book, The Lifers, that launched just before lockdown. Is that right?
I think it was a week or so before. Yeah.
A week, right? Just before we went in because of this whole pandemic.
Yeah.
Was that a bit stressful for you in terms of getting a book out just in time before the whole country shuts down?
No, because we didn't know that the country was going to be going into that kind of thing. Like I remember the day after the launch, feeling the whole psyche of the country feels like it's changed.
Yeah.
And sure enough, like that week. But I was grateful. It was really moving launch. Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, it was really cool that book came out. And then a launch like could happen. So I'm really grateful that it came out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's kind of like written over sort of, a period of time. A lot of stuff happened in that time. So, really good stuff and some kind of like hard stuff, So it was cool to kind of like see all that, have that book finished.
And have that down on a page.
Well, not even that. Really, that stuff gets written about in the book, but like things go on in your life when you're kind of writing, like you have to just endure and persist sometimes, and but like it was really cool to have that kind of to be launched and to be sharing it with like all these people I'm really close to, who've been a part of the journey of that book. Gestation and development stuff. So I'm really thankful that came out.
Yeah, absolutely. Building on that sort of, I mean, we're only slowly still coming out of lockdown right now, but have you felt that COVID-19 has had and sort of potentially will continue to have an effect on the way you write at all?
I don't know. Writing is a solitary activity. So I don't know. I can't do writing in a room full of people, or it's kind of like going to the toilet or something with, like door on the toilet or something. Or I don't know, but so in that aspect, it seems to be, for me, it's kind of all right. I like you just do it alone in your shed or in your bedroom or at the kitchen table or something. So I don't know, but as for how writing is received, there seems to be a lot of really cool initiatives that kind of were thrown up by COVID. Like there's a journal that's coming out of Wellington called Stasis, edited by two poets, Jordan Hummel and a woman called Sinead Overbite. And like every day of the lockdown, they'd put up a poem or a essay or a short story by a writer, cool. And with an accompanying sort of image. You see loads of people hitting the Instagram, reading poems. So, like people will always, if people want poetry and stuff, like there's plenty of mediums that. I don't know about like Facebook. I don't really use Facebook, but I do have an Instagram. So what I did in the first week of lockdown was like, I was a little bit bummed that kind of like my book had come out just before lockdown,
Absolutely.
But what I realized was, I thought I want to, share some of the poems on this, in this book. So I did a little recording every morning of one of the poems, video, and then put that up on Instagram. So you can kind of share some of your mahi with like your 25 followers or something. So people are adapting, So they use Instagram, they use Facebook, they use Twitter. They do book launches that way.
Virtual book launches.
I think like a few titles were launched with virtual kind of. The whole Ockham Book Awards was. I didn't watch it, but I think that was done as a Zoom type meeting or something. So people, technology, they just kind of adapt. But I don't know. I really like poetry readings. Where you have a room of people and you can kind of speak the poems. Like to me, that's just as important as having a poem published in a book. To me, that's when the poem's activated.
Right.
Yeah, you can like write it on the page and make it look really beautiful, which I think every poet that's serious does that. They know it's got this architectural component, this linguistic component, this auditory component. But when you say the poem aloud, I think that's when it is sort of it's born.
Right. Would you call poetry in perhaps not, obviously not all aspects, but do you think there's a real performance element to poetry then?
There seems to be, Yeah. I don't really know what's sort of going on like in the poetry world that much, but I have a little son and he sort of takes up quite a lot of my time and things. But, there's heaps of poets that do performances and stuff. Like they're influenced by the likes of Gil Scott Heron and the whole MC culture and things like that. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they kill it, eh? Like they,
Mm.
like I can't get up there and just like rattle out 16 bars of like hellfire kind of, you know,
right, yeah,
blah 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 stuff. I can't do that, eh? Like I so admire it, eh? But yeah, there seems to be a really big performance, slam kind of, yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as you've slowly gotten more and more into poetry, and you know, to the point where you're now a published poet, do you sort of have a memory of the first time you performed poetry for others?
I've read poems a lot of times, but some of the early times were at like Poetry Live, you know, which is an Auckland live poetry event that has moved around a lot of venues over the years. But I used to go along to those for a long time and listen, and then you gradually get the confidence to share your poem, and you make friends with all these other poets, eh? And you know, they turn you on to other writers, and it's just really kind of cool synergistic thing that used to happen from those events, eh? And they're quite feral at times, eh? Like there was a lot of alcohol around, and
oh really?
Yeah, but there was always really tight poetry, eh? And all sorts of styles, eh? Yeah.
Oh, that's
so like, you know, I started going to that in 2000 and sharing poems then, and then yeah, really bad poems still, but yeah.
Well, I suppose you've got to start somewhere.
Well, you just have to, if you feel compelled to set something down in the poem, like you do that thing. Sometimes compulsion or whatever you won't have it for a long time, mate. And then you'll be writing poems every day for 18 months or something.
Yeah.
Not writing them for another year or whatever. It's fickle business, eh? But yeah, I don't know. The good thing about going to university, I think, for some people, like I see it in the tutorials, is them being forced to write. Like I've got a pretty good routine of getting up in the morning early, really early, and making coffee and going out to my shed and just sitting there. And there's a poem to work on or something, you know, it's there. But that's what I do every morning. And if I've got writing to be getting on with, that's sort of time it gets done, eh? But
yeah, right.
You know, the students in the group that I tutor say that having to turn and work every week helps them kind of keep writing.
Is that sort of routine you have of going out and you know, making sure you're writing every day? Is that something? Is that a habit you've had to develop, or have you found? I suppose where do you find that motivation to write? How do you balance that? Because I know I've heard, you know, a lot of people, I'm sure everyone deals with at times, you know, not wanting to write, not wanting to get out there and just do the hard yards. How have you sort of dealt with those times where, you know, you lack?
I don't know. Sometimes, I don't know. Sometimes I just go, I don't really have a lot else to, you know, like I'm in my mid-40s. I have a little son. I don't know. Writing's just something else that I have. I don't really know what I'd have if I didn't do it. Eh?
Right.
You know, some people like doing gardening and they're obsessive about buying like stuff on eBay or whatever. Writing's a bit like an obsessive hobby or something. I've got it.
Right,
you know? Yeah. But it's important, that said, for writers to go out and do other stuff in the world, eh? Like work at shitty jobs and, you know, like all that stuff, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. As well as reading all the books and experience, you know, like experience. And before COVID, travel was a really good thing for writers to do, eh?
Yeah, right.
But anyway, that might, you know, be changed.
Yeah, well, again, that's another case of writers having to adapt, isn't it?
Yeah. But, you know, like I've been doing this kind of ongoing serial back to that geography thing that you at the start of our conversation. Like there's a little thing on Google that's drop pin, you know, you can drop and I like it.
Yeah.
Years ago thought, I didn't really have any thing that I was trying to write about, but like you can go around the world with that Google thing and like just drop it somewhere, right? And I started doing that, and I get these kind of poems come from doing that. So I've got this sort of, I call it a serial poem, because it's sort of ongoing, eh?
Yeah.
I don't ever finish it in one of the books or anything. There's always just parts of it. Maybe one day I'll do a book called Drop Pin, that is all the Drop Pin poems, but
Clever, yeah.
you know, they're occasional, and yeah, I just like to keep this thing going on. But that's sort of one thing that I do to kind of like travel.
Yeah.
Your
Oh,
imagination
that's
will
cool.
fill in all the other stuff.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned just earlier that it's important to have other things, even if you know it's a crappy job or whatever. Why is that important? Do you think?
Sorry.
Why do you think that's important?
Well, because I think the best writing's got the world in it, eh?
Yeah, right.
And so it's good for writers to go out and kind of like, I don't know, you know, just scent the world, feel the everything of the world, eh? Like get the world rush at you through all your senses or something.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Right.
And it helps contextualize all the reading that you do as well. Eh?
I suppose if we again jump back to how in a lot of your poetry, you know, you get really specific on certain places.
I like detail, eh?
Yeah, and it's a lot of those things, from what I've read, are details you wouldn't get if you were locked up in a tower writing about, you know, whatever muse has inspired you. You know, a lot of those, a lot of that language and detail, you know, potentially comes from real world experience.
Well, I think like writing about them, I don't know. Everyone has that. Excuse me, I just dropped something.
No, you're all right.
Has that sense of getting inspired, eh? Like it's just, I don't know. I like the world, and I want to keep trying to put the world into my writing.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Like I had this problem, a writing problem for a while, where the way that I was writing was like I had read these people at an impressionable kind of time. And in terms of every writer has stylistic kind of like, you know, influences or sort of like sponsors or something that help them kind of like, you know what I'm saying, eh? Like,
I do
find their style or whatever. And like when I started out seriously writing poetry, like the people that were sort of dazzling me, you know, they were like a bad crowd that would lead you into a cul-de-sac and mug you or something, eh? But no,
Right, yeah.
You know, that you couldn't ape their style, eh? Like it wasn't. And the reason why is because it had like these tendrils that went right back to the beginning of time, sort of. You know, in terms of their influence, they had read the whole canon, eh? Like they'd
right. So you
assimilated
sort of
everything, eh? So I sort of thought, well, you can't really do that. And it was kind of like this writing was mud, eh? So I was like, I didn't write for a while, and then I don't know what happened. I just started writing in a way that was, I don't want to say looser, but a bit more freer, not as clotted as that had been, eh? And with that, more details of more sort of narrative kind of stuff. Detail just keep coming into the poems. Yeah.
You know, following role models and people who inspire you. But from what you've just said, it sounds like, you know, there's a potential for other writers to sometimes hold you back if you're trying to emulate someone.
Yeah, that's it. But it's not, you're learning the wrong thing from them, eh?
Right.
Or you're not learning the thing from them, perhaps. I don't know. I love writers that it's evident that they have read other writers and they wear their kind of influences sort of like, you know, that's cool. But like, that's my experience was there were certain poets and things I was reading that, I don't know, it's kind of like they took you further away from yourself. So I don't know.
So would you say then it's important to have your own voice?
I don't believe in what your own voice is. This thing about a voice, eh? Like, I know every creative writing class they say, oh, you have to find your voice or whatever. But like, a voice is a composite of, it's a babel of all these other voices, eh? Yeah.
Right. So what do you think it is important for a writer to have to distinguish themselves, like if not a voice?
Oh, I just try to be honest, eh?
Honesty, right.
Yeah.
Interesting, yeah.
Which is a lesson I don't know, honesty, eh? Like, yeah. But that's when I say honestly, I mean being honest to the situation of that poem, not honest to reality or the truth or whatever in the world, you know, but that thing that the poem will know what's truthful or honest to it, eh? You know, like in that poem, yeah. You know, when you're using words that are a bit kind of like too highfalutin or something for the, you know, yeah. Yeah. But also, we speak differently at different times, right? And different.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, so that's sort of like the voice should, if you want to use that word, should show that those kind of modulations or whatever. Right?
So you mentioned a little bit earlier on, you've got that tutor group for a creative writing class. Is that your first tutor group, or have you done a bit of sort of tutoring in that sense earlier?
Not like this, but yeah, this is yeah, it's this. I tutored last summer a writing paper as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you found that to be sort of a new challenge, or have you learnt any new things in becoming a tutor for other people's writing? Has that been very different?
Well, I mean, you always have, if you're a writer, like you have your poet friends that you show your poems to each other, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, like it's kind of, I like those relationships, and I had those for a long time before I came. You know, like just people who are your mates that like, are also, you know, chipping away at poems or something. You know, so you show each other your work. So you just, because what you want to try and do is, like, the author has their vision of what this piece is. The piece sort of knows where it wants to go. And as whatever I do is I sit there and kind of just talk with the student about, or just, yeah, it's hard. It's hard to edit people's writing because it's sort of like their soul work, eh? So,
yeah,
you know, but you can only go, oh, the grammar's bad here, or, you know, this image is a bit cliched, and you just want to try and help them to kind of see the way to realize what they want and what the story wants or the poem wants, eh? You know, and find
almost in a way there's only so much you can do when it comes to feedback, because poetry and creative writing in general is such a
you just get people to read, eh? Like young people don't read enough, eh?
Right.
They don't read poetry. Like they don't go and read they don't have that hunger to go and read every poet that ever wrote or anything. They're not out. I don't know. Everyone I know that's a writer is also like pretty obsessive reader, right? And in their own way, they've gone and done a pretty serious immersion job, you know, on what they on writing. Eh? Like they read widely and like all sorts of genres and things like that. They don't discriminate. You know, they do the whole thing. But I don't know. Young people have so much to distract them. You know, like they have all these apps. They're like, you know, like video games, all sorts of stuff. That's where they get their narratives and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I am astounded at how, or maybe I just don't know what, you know, people read. But like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's the thing that people need to do. Young writers is just go hard and try and read as many books. Yeah, absolutely. That's where you learn about writing from. Is reading, yeah. Is reading intelligently, like, you know, and looking at how poetic utterance has kind of gone from being this, you know, primal thing through to what it sort of is now, right? Yeah. That has, you can see the history of poetics in it.
Right.
No,
The topic of poetry being a very, you know, going through, as you said, a very primal thing at one stage.
Well, you know, it's the first utterance probably was, the first word is the first poem or something, maybe.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Sound, the first,
There you go, I think poetry always ends up, in one way or another, being a very vulnerable thing, as a lot of art forms are, especially for authors. And I'd love to know, how do you sort of balance being honest, as you said, and writing about tough topics and tough situations, as you've covered in a few of your poems before, while at the same time not putting too much of yourself out there? Do you know, if you know what I mean? You know,
there's certain times that I blow the door off the vault and put all of myself in there. Right?
Yeah.
But like, there's a really long poem at the start of The Lifers about a money truck getting robbed, and it has a violent kind of. There's a moment in it, a little bit of violence, but it's sort of like what I was trying to do was, just reimagine that or refresh that archetype of Apollo and Hermes stealing his cattle when he was a kid.
Yeah.
That kind of archetype. But so I just thought, set it in Nielsen Street in Auckland, where someone, some guys knock off a money truck. I've never done that myself, but I have met people who have done similar things like that. So you just pick stuff up, and you go, fuck, I'll put that away somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't know. Yeah. But yeah, there are poems in both those collections that are quite personal, like autobiographical, I guess you'd say. Confessional, but
yeah,
but not all the time, mate. That's a mistake that people think with reading poetry, that it's always
autobiographical.
The author's first-hand experience.
Does that make it difficult to hear criticism at times if someone potentially, hypothetically, reads one of these poems, perhaps doesn't quite get it, and then you've got, they might criticize it for this or that? Do you struggle with that at all when people don't quite hit the nail on the head with what you're intending, especially if you're being vulnerable in that poem?
Every poem will hopefully find the person that needs to read it or something. So you can just, I don't know, but I've had some quite bad responses to poems over the years. Sure. Yeah.
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see, as culture just continues to speed up, and I mean, you look at.
I'm hoping that COVID slows everything down a little bit.
Right. Okay. In what sense do you, like globally, in terms of the internet and how much we consume, or what do you sort of mean by that?
How much we consume, and also how easy it is to go and do stuff. I'm going to go to Singapore, boom, fly there, or whatever. People used to have to build kind of ships and study the stars and all that kind of, now they're distracted by Elon Musk's kind of like bands of, satellites zooming. Yeah, anyway, whatever. But I don't know, I sort of hope that the world slows down. Like, one of the upshots of this whole thing is air pollution has dropped and stuff. Like places are starting to regenerate because the world's a bit cleaner because humans haven't been consuming as fast or as rapidly.
It's an interesting. It'll be very interesting to see what that means for the sort of the future of content in general, I think, but particularly writing. That'll be something interesting to see.
For sure. I imagine like there'll be a whole load of COVID kind of literature that comes out.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's quite interesting reading like on sort of blogs and stuff about people's, how they're responding, like to this situation. I've enjoyed that. I mean, these are really strange times, But
absolutely.
Yeah, really strange, So I don't know, just have to kind of stand back and keep a sort of, open mind,
I want to take you back again and just sort of ask a more general question. What, when you sort of look back on your journey through writing, what's been the hardest challenge that you've faced?
Trying to get people to take you seriously as a poet is quite a big challenge,
Really?
Yeah, because I don't know, I grew up around with in families of men that didn't really talk much, eh?
Yeah.
You know, like, so, you know, poets are sort of, I don't know, freaks, eh? They were. I don't know. Yeah, it's trying to take yourself seriously as a poet, eh? Is, to me, perhaps the hardest thing, eh? Yeah, or have other people kind of, but like it is sort of an embarrassing kind of like, I don't know. Oh, a poet. Like, you know, someone introduces you as a poet and you'll be in a bar or something and they go, oh, give us a poem, mate. Tell us a poem.
Yeah, right.
What do you mean? So they expect you to like have some kind of like, you know, sort of like tightly quatrain, you know, doggerel there to spout off or something. I don't know. But,
has that been a personal journey as well as an external one? Like sort of coming to realise within yourself that you are a poet?
Yeah, I kind of have always accepted that was something that I was into and wanted to be, but I don't. I've lived the way I wanted to live my whole life, so you know, I'm kind of thankful. And yeah, certainly in the last kind of like, you know, 20 years, it's been pretty focused on trying to write as much as I can.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've tried to make that the main thing for a long time, and I have a pretty cool little life, eh? Like I'm pretty happy.
Yeah.
With my lot in the world, eh? Yeah.
Well, our time is just about drawing to an end, Michael. This has been awesome. I've loved this chat. I've got one more question for you. I love throwing this out there to different people, but it's this. What is a question you wished people asked you more? Or perhaps what is a question that you find yourself asking yourself?
Oh, that's a good one, eh? I can tell you the weirdest question I've ever been asked, eh?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah,
okay.
That sounds interesting.
Someone said to me once, it was a sort of at a book event thing, like a panel of people that had put out first books, and the person goes, oh, what's your definition of success? And I was with two novelists, right? And I thought that was more fitting for the novelists, eh? Because poetry is kind of like this thing that, you know, it's only the only people, I don't know, it's poets that are into poetry, eh? Like, you know, the poets are writing for other poets, basically,
yeah.
And I just said, well, like the next poem, mate, because that's sort of all it is, eh? That's all it's kind of like reducible to, eh? Just that next poem. You just have to be waiting for that. Like that's it. Yeah.
Awesome. Waiting for that next poem.
Yeah, well that's it. You just hope you get the next poem, mate.
Yeah.
Finish one poem and you're like, yeah, cool. And then
cool.
hope that another one comes out.
Well, that is an awesome sentiment to end on there. I've really loved our conversation. So just once again, thank you so much for being a part of it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me along.
No worries. Well, everybody, Michael Steven. All right. I'll see you later, eh?
Thank you.
Stop going round telling everyone you were in a detention centre, chides my brother, half blood, half the trauma. I want to tell him our father did not name me Nida, call, without reason. I am the muazzin of this mosque, my home its minaret, the adhan my truth, to broadcast at Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha. The believers will congregate, recite after me. We are the children of mothers who fear water like they fear God. 45 nights at sea choking on prayers and the stench of decomposing bodies. We are the daughters of fathers who sew their lips shut in protest. Their only weapons blunt needles and thread black with blood. We drank bleach, mistaking it for rain. Rode on strangers' shoulders to have our stomachs pumped. Our uncles already heavy with the corpses of our people. We did not learn the alphabet. No room for pencils and hands carrying mountains of rocks Changizi fired when we passed his room. We were bathed, 4 at a time, in sinks for dirty laundry. We hid underneath beds to escape the fists of angry brown men. We screamed,
for we did not know how to speak. In those 30 months, they would visit us, golden-haired, fair-skinned, blue passports in hand. They took our photographs, immortalized us in film, painted our pain in shades of magenta, left us on the other side of the chain link fence.
My foot unravels at the ankle. Filaments of blood and gold spin across the sand. You told me our blue shanty on Paloma Beach was unsinkable, that it would say its Hail Marys and swallow. Gulls pick at my door, leave white feathers in your shoes, call me in cigarette voices to pull down the blood-red roses and leave you in the longboat till we're sober. Pebbles drip from my eyes, bounce off seams choking my hands, my breasts, where you pulled out the glass with flat-tipped tweezers and used my wet hair to thread your mother's needle. You crunch leaves between your fingers, flick black specks in the air, and climb down my throat with grey lilies you stole from her lips. Bees crash at the window, spill yellow down my cheeks, murmur in thick pollen. Don't ever take heed of what pretty boys say, or you'll sink in the salt, and they'll plant daisies in your eyes.
Would you like to buy a mystery envelope? After Alison MacLean. Do not answer the door. Pull me out of the sink hole and submerge in foley strangle a tortoise plug ging its strawberry tongue. Reverse whirlpool, web of white pipes, bleed hair and scraps into its poor corners. System of storms formed on water. Listen, please, when I ask you. Do not pick up the phone while the tap runs. I cannot speak for fear of flooding. Fold me into the bubbles, hear the rubber squeak, attached to nothing. Blade me clean in daylight. De-beast my limbs, scrape each turn with taut caution, follicle the dry ear, see if I shed. Headless synthesis hum us into bed together, detune my spine. Hold me with your soft plastic so I can breathe, my black eyes just the same as yours. Drop the weapon, don't try to save me. I am here to look after the living, here to touch you, mute, where the jug cord spins blood into quavers, claving red through each contraction. Drop the weapon, spin me into your flush of sadnesses, a slow light on the back of the neck, finger finds the eye wall, pull the O, pull the O. Pull the O. Drop the weapon, drift low across the mouth wide with O, that small cyclone cocktail of winds, squall of pinking noise. When I hit the water, you will see the O, see my O exactly where you expect to find it, exactly where you expect thick wet ropes to grow from.
Where I got the idea of apart from for Papatuanuku. Listen. No, truly. Listen. It is her. In between the spaces of this poem, where the black lines of the sky crater into the light, at the base of every sound, at the center of all gravity, is everything she is, and was, and will be. A clenchedness, a tired cough caught closing, here. Her say just be and awe and listen, made of falling soil soft between great crevasses, the tectonic and the brush, Press yourself to the ground. Really listen. Does it dip or rise? There shouldn't be any breaks here, should there? Listen. What is movement like now that she has had so long to stretch her own body outwards? Listen. It was either to stubbornly get mud all up the back of my legs, or it was that I kept my shoes on until the jams in my toes began to stink through my school socks. There was no in between, bare feet and otherwise. I would sit in the backyard with my legs crossed, like some memory of meditation transported from the television. The clothesline would creak for the wind. The green grass would tickle nervous lines onto the hairs growing. I would pull at one until the whole line of root gave, and stare at the patches of steam that pushed from the little concrete path that followed the murder of a whole colony of ants. Couldn't smell them like how I could smell them if and when I squeezed them into nothing between my fingers and thumb. Listen. I guess he misses her and vice versa, spinning on one foot inside of a dust mote seen in the reflection of a lonely shuttle making its escape to the edges of the night. Listen, she gives us a whakapapa of shape, so unlike destruction. We all swim in her until birth and long after, like flowers turned upside down and stretching towards warmth. Listen, the fern is starting to dry out. The word that saves us from mold extracts all moisture from the plant. I sit the dying thing on the cabinet next to my bed. I lay my head on the pillow and watch it shrivel. Listen. It's like writing about something like this makes my life feel important, but it also gives me a severe pressure in the gut. I can't just think my way out of. The dehumidifier is on almost non-stop these days because of how damp our little unit gets, a constant whirring inside of me and out. Listen. Really fucking listen to her. She's getting ready to let go, and we know the names of the people who are forcing her hand, first and last names, their pictures on the internet. Each one a number and a face we can find, eating dinner, retired into a wall of not talking to their family that they built a world of nothing for. The dull lamp lights shriveling up on electronic metal, the pipes and pipes and pipes of it, the shit we drive through, let her take back what they have tried to steal. But the man in the suit is disappearing into fork clink through steak, rarer than his wealth. Cinch that tie just a little closer in to pinch at the neck, maybe even a speck of blood pulling itself out and onto the fine cotton, onto the fine work of others. A minuscule globe the colour of maybe the work of giving these bodies back to her will do enough to end the pain. Listen. In the night, I can hear cows grazing out in the paddocks, their low groans, some symbol of childhood. Each one will lift their tail to swat or relieve themselves. A memory of a farm and the way life was meant to be, plunging right into the earth. Listen. The handkerchiefs I kept in my pockets always deterred my bullies from checking once they had felt the cold damp of my runny nose caught in the cloth. But listen. She is singing, an asphalt scream digging into the sides of mountains or dams, suffocating rivers into dwindle its schist scatter. The wire trapped inside the throat of a bird, or such gargantuan rumbling as the sky torn out from the air, a real physical noise like the one coming out of my head, or mouth as I read this poem out loud to my friends who are all in the same room behind glass, leaning fragile on desks, leaning back in chairs so scuffed carpet. A cool blue fading to white. Read these words out loud to my friends who are all in the same boat. Starts out as a metaphor, but we've seen how the water rises and I'm holding a pen in my hand or barely holding on to anything. Oh, fuck, why? After all of this, would you take me back? Or maybe it's a trick to suggest we ever left. I can hold a grain of sand in my mind's eye. It trembles in and out of focus. It creates a mountain of glass between my lids. I can almost hear the music of it coming in hacked starts. Wet fingerprints sprout icicles, stratifying notes coming in singe of wind under wing. They assemble a choir to sing. Their drone pushing to the edges of breath until ragged glitch of exhale. I hold my hands over my ears and try not to feel it radiating from my very bones. A homesickness that is gigantic, bigger than all our longing combined. Listen.
Fish lips are like so and now, since white girls renamed it Juridam and made it trendy to look like me without the third grade trauma. Gwen Stefani was like so cool when she took the bindi, made it Coachella friendly. Brown girls still have tikka masala breath, bullied for that fucking ugly red dot. White girls love wearing war bonnets in their itsy American Eagle bikinis. Because it's like art. Go to bed with dream catchers above their Confederate flag sheets. Native tribes. Fight for like land. Fight for like rights. Fight for like their people. Fight to like survive. Hashtag white girls look away. Silent complicit is still complicit. Like protest in the corporate colonization of indigenous land is just like so not cool. White people get to pick and choose, mix and match cultures like it's a fucking game, but we're too sensitive. I miss when white girls tend to be early 2000s Paris Hilton orange instead of ethnic fishing for the gram. Exotic is like so cute, as long as it's packaged golden natural M10, caramel beige M80, soft honey T20. You can't be easy breezy beautiful if you're espresso D90.
Come into the garden where your mother and uncle lean the bamboo corpses into triangle arches for the beans. The garden where the earth reads your palm, and the lifeline, and the love line, the heart line, are dirty and mud. Come into the garden and watch your mother bleed into loose denim overalls, wearing only a bra for underwear and nothing inside. The garden full of unmade fish ponds, gurgling, scratch-up chickens, and the smell of fresh depression. Come to the garden and sit dangling on the swing in silent thought of your lost virginity while your uncle waters the lettuce. The garden where your mother lives, next to the pigsty where your mother lives, for she does not enter the house anymore. Then come into the garden and find the maggots and the bones among the weeds beneath the fallen bean arches. The garden you've forgotten, because you have been forgotten, because things weren't left forgotten. And you've come into the garden with a barrel, with a lighter, with a diary, and you don't want to read.
The bandit passenger in a stolen Subaru rests a Glock 9 on his left thigh. He studies the face of his watch. The minute hand jumps into place. It's time. His pulse lifts. He rolls the woolen balaclava over his face. An armor guard truck parks in front of the bank. The door opens. A voice inside his head yells out, "Go." Iron sands, Nikau Palm's prehistoric vistas, the Tasman's relentless hydraulic surging. At his batch, our great modernist poet enjoys Pascal's pensees and a pipe of tobacco. An austere metaphysician, the modernist poet considers kelp fronds, oyster catchers, mussel beds on jagged rocks. He knows the colour at the heart of all matter is not even a colour. Nearly always it is still dark when he threads the chain of the roller door through his hands, and as that steel door shudders and shrieks as it rolls up, he will most certainly be wearing his red waistcoat woolen swanndry, the one that smells of cigarettes and the sea. When the roller door made its final revolution around the steel pole, clanging the day into place, and impressions from the cold iron chain links were still laddered dense across his palms, my father, most certainly with the gentle light of dawn suffusing the asphalt yard before us with a newness, would take a gold box of Benson and Hedges and light it from the pocket of his swanndry. My father, standing with his back to me, tamping against the gold box the cigarette he will soon light. Deep in reverie, what is it he was contemplating? Was it the way the dew settling again on the windows of his ute would glisten like broken particles of iridium? Or was it the sad piles of spent cardboard tubes, vinyl and fabrics wrapped around them by mullet-headed upholsterers named Mark and Terry, who sported black jeans and flannel shirts, the scraps used to cover couches and chairs and car interiors? As he stood there, my father, with his back to me, was he watching the breasts of a woman named Sandy, the blonde my mother insists he had an affair with, moving beneath her apron as she bent and lifted a tray of bread at the lunch bar across the driveway, while I waited among the wrecks inside his workshop? Is it too late to ask him if he was looking at the metal, halide street lamps, craned in vigil like haloed icons over the nights of Nelson Street? Did my father stare past the wire lattice fence of the freight yards into the stacks of battered grey and green containers? Instead of an impenetrable lexicon, did the names of mysterious ports ring in his mind like fragments from ancient poems or koans? When the sun rose above the corrugated iron factories, and Kenworth trucks with trailers arrived at the freight yard, and men wearing blue overalls who worked as upholsterers, car wreckers, mechanics, panel beaters, spray painters, auto electricians, scrap dealers, forklift operators, lined up in Sandy's lunch bar to buy pies and ham sandwiches, cold cans of soft drink and cigarettes, did my father wonder, standing beside him, if I was sharing the same reverie?
Hello and welcome to the second writers panel of the Virtual Writers Festival. We are joined in conversation by talented and always interesting writers and professors. These are Mark Houlahan and Kirstine Moffat. Welcome.
Kia ora.
Lovely to be here.
Awesome. I think we can start by asking, how is it that you got into writing? I think your students and lots of people will be really interested to hear like how you got to where you are now.
Well, I think I was thinking about this. I think I probably recently define myself as a reader of other people's work, also as a writer of my own work. But everything for me goes back to being a child being read to by my parents, particularly my father. And I grew up in Scotland, and in my memory of being read to as a child, it's always dark outside. We're always sitting under a little standard lamp, and there's this pool of light, and my dad's reading to me. So I probably need a magic of words on the page and things to read and entering all kinds of fictional worlds from Richard Scarry's Busy World was one of my earliest memories. Being taken through stories by Beatrix Potter, and then Swallows and Amazons by Arthur Ransom and Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables, and all of them read in my dad's voice. And to this day, even when I'm teaching, some of the things I've been teaching at the moment, including Great Expectations, that was first read aloud to me by my father. So I think words read aloud that would be the primary influence on me, both as a reader and a writer.
Awesome.
Apparently I could read when I was 4. I have an older brother and sister, so I just kind of made myself do what they could do. And so I went to school early because we were going to a convent school, and the nun said, "Oh, just if Mark can read, just send him along." So I don't remember a time since then when I wasn't just kind of obsessed with reading, and a slight kind of panic on any given day as to what I would read next. And when would reading happen again? And that's why I became English prof, really, because I discovered there was this job where you had to do all this reading. Like, cool, where can I sign, And of course now, like everyone else, I fight for time to read other things than course stuff, just like you guys as students. And I remember just loving in primary school, when you had to write a story and you made a picture for the story and all those things. That was really cool. I remember once I was in sixth form, which was like year 12. My dad came home. My dad came to parent-teacher night, and the next day, my English teacher said, "So your dad says you want to be a writer?" And I said, "Yeah, kind of." I had no idea how that would happen, but I did. And he gave me his own copy of Virginia Woolf's A Writer's Diary to read. And it's a compilation from her diary that her husband made of all the passages in her diary where she talks about writing and how she'd buy a new notebook to start a book and all these things about the writing process. And that started my lifelong obsession with Virginia Woolf. And it's one of her books I still read a lot. Not because I aspire to be a genius like Virginia Woolf, but because she's really clear about what she's trying to do and how many words she's written, how many copies her book has sold, and because she's writing pre-computer, she's obsessed with the kind of fountain pen she uses. So all these little things about how the story works kind of interested me. And one of the things I like about, especially writing things that are not to do with academic writing, is the way you can use writing to control things. Because you're not, if you're writing something for assessment, you have to fulfill the teacher's agenda. If you want to get a grade, you'll address the issue in the right kind of way. But if you're writing, a poem or a short story or a piece of memoir, it's yours, and you never have to publish it. You never have to release it unless you want to. You never have to, if you're in a class, you use it in workshop. But apart from that, it's just yours, and so you can completely control that world and that idea of what happened to you or things that didn't happen to you, what your memory was. And if you want to, you can just keep on revising it and nobody else will ever see it, but you can keep on making it better. And I do know writers who I think will keep on writing like that. I think the world will never see their genius, but but the writing will still be somehow important to them. And the other thing I really like about writing is that mostly, of course, now we would write using a computer, but you don't have to. You can get like a piece of paper, pen, and you're always picking up pens in places. Even now, you're not supposed to pick up other people's pens, but you do. You come home. How to get this insurance company pen? What is this shit? And so if you have like a jotter pad or an exercise book, you can write. And that's very different from if you were making like a short film or you're putting on a play or you're going to get a band together and you got to get gigs. Once you can get gigs again, that's all really complicated and requires a big team approach. But if you want to write, you can just write and absolutely nobody can stop you. It's great.
Yeah, I definitely I think it's really interesting as well, like as you guys were saying, like you guys were stating sort of some of the main novels that stuck with you and that you went on further to teach. So I think that's pretty cool because obviously I'm in both of your guys' papers. So, we have, Virginia Woolf and, we also have Great Expectations. Like, I think it's pretty cool as well, like, seeing how that just sticks with you and makes you want to teach others about it. I think that's a great thing with the passing of time with literature. But I think another point, so as you were sort of getting onto there, Mark, there's various types of
work, you know. And so we noticed as well that you both have quite an interest in and are involved in both writing and theatre. I happened to bump into you at a performance before, and so what we wanted to know is, how do you think these two things intertwine, and why do you think they work so well together with literature, you know, and theatre? And are there many differences with the two? Have you both noticed, you know, being a part of it?
Okay. Well, I think one really important link is that for theatre to work, a theatre performance to work, you have to have good words. And that applies whether you're doing like a fully scripted thing, you know, like a Shakespeare thing or a Chekhov, something that would be considered quite traditional, or even if you're doing like, you know, if you're doing devised theatre, you still have to have the scenario worked out. Or if you're making a short film, right, and there was going to be no dialogue in the film at all. It was completely just sound and images and actors' faces. You know, you still have to work that out in a really tight way in words and have people agree on them. Otherwise, it's just an unholy mess. And I know Kirstine and I have been in devised theatre evenings, which were kind of entertaining, but just a car crash, really. You know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
made no sense. They really pushed out the boat. You know, so you do have to have. Good words. So certainly my interest in theatre, and I love reading play scripts. I have a natural interest in reading just for their own sake play scripts, and so I love in a play in particular. The play is only going to be for half an hour, 2 hours, so everything has to be really kind of condensed. And there's a point the writer is making is very different from like a big Dickens novel where the point can be 500 pages in and still be the point. But, you know, audiences do not hang around that long, and that's partly because of them issuing those in parts, right? So that they'd read a bit each month and get the point. But and mostly when you go to see a performance, obsessives like me, I might go 4 times if I liked a show, you know. But most people go once, and you can't stop it, right? So if you don't get it, you don't get it. And if you come out thinking, I don't get that, what the hell was that? Then the show has failed, no matter what the people in the show think. The show has failed. The point didn't get across. So the kind of writing you need you need to work out what you're trying to say and then really kind of condense it down. But then I think another really strong connection is that in a really interesting poem with a really strong voice, you can hear that person speaking. It's like a kind of soliloquy, and especially in the novels that Shannon you're doing in Kirstine's novel class, all those novels are crammed full of scenes which cry out for performance, and that's why they're so brilliantly and so often adapted in various mediums. So there are lots of sequences which are devised kind of like pieces in a play. And partly because the writers are really conscious of that tradition, and you can tell they know when they're writing a big kind of set piece scene. So yeah, I think there are lots of crossovers.
I absolutely agree, and just kind of springboarding on what Matt's just been talking about. And one of my lovely moments with one of those crossovers between something designed to be read on the page that then kind of can be adapted to the stage. I had some students a few years ago doing a paper on comedy, and some of them fell in love with Dorothy Parker, who we looked at several Dorothy Parker short stories, and they were inspired to transform some of those stories into a kind of loosely sequenced play. And what I found fascinating about that kind of act of being involved with them and helping them is how little the stories had to change, that everything was there already to be spoken out loud. And some of Parker's stories are written like those set-piece dialogues that Mark was talking about. They're designed to be spoken on the telephone, or two people having an argument or a confrontation. So I think there's lots of crossovers between reading and theatre, and one of the things I particularly like, I think, about the stage, particularly if you're thinking of the translation of a play script onto the stage, is exactly as Matt said, every performance is unique and different, And so what I love about theatre is I've been to see some particularly Shakespeare plays, but also something like Oscar Wilde's Importance of Being Earnest. I've seen them multiple times, and each time something new is brought to the work, and something that you never thought about before you discover on the stage, because the word is being spoken aloud, because of the interpretation to a character, a nuance of language. So I think for me there's a great excitement in watching theatre, a bit more trepidation in being involved in theatre. I think I'd have to say, there's a certain relationship between the performativity of theatre and the performativity of teaching. But I don't get freaked out or nervous when I'm teaching most of the time. But when you're standing in the wings waiting to go on, you kind of think it would be much better to be in the audience watching this and experiencing this, rather than taking part of it. But somehow you just love it. And I think there's something too about theatre, which is a little different from the act of reading. But reading, we get to talk about books in class all the time, so it is a communal act. But the act of reading is often a solitary one. And so I also love, I think, the community of theatre, the making of meaning together with a group.
Someone who's because I've done theatre in the past, like I definitely agree as well with the there's it's sort of different performing in in comparison to reading, like with all the various forms of interpretation. So yeah, I definitely theatre is
I think that's a really important difference for people who are really immersed in. If you're reading a powerful text, if you go to see a performance of that text, or based on that text, or like a Jane Austen performance, or a Jane Austen film, or a Tolkien film, any one of those adaptations, if you already love the book, then the common reaction is that you're not seeing your book on the screen or on the stage, and that's because when you're reading it, you frame your own idea of what the characters look like and what they sound like and what the world looks like, and sometimes it doesn't quite match up. And the power of reading is that every reader's then idea of that world is in a sense valid. If that's what you think Middle Earth looks like, then that's what Middle Earth looks like, when you were, from whenever you first started reading it. But in a performance of a script, the designers and the production team, they have to make choices, otherwise there's nothing to see. It's like, well, Elsinore Hamlet's castle is going to look like this, or Romeo and Juliet's balcony, it's going to be, I don't know, let's be cool. That'll be a big heap of garbage, and we'll have loud punk music and people will love it, and all those design choices that people need to make. And if they haven't made those choices, then there's nothing for you to see. It would be perfectly fine to have a rubbish heap, as if the Romeo and Juliet could convince you that they loved each other in that moment, then it would actually still work because of the power of the words. And it doesn't, for those kinds of scenarios, I think it's the connection that the actors make that is much more important to the audience. And the audience will put up with a whole bunch of malarkey if they think the actors are onto it, and can really deliver. But that kind of voice in your head. Now, in the past, reading was a lot more done communally. Adults read communally much more frequently, like before our forms of media, entertainment, and Netflix and all that stuff. And there are lots of accounts from the 18th and 19th century of people taking turns reading whole novels to each other in the way that parents read now to children, as Kirstine was talking about her dad. But that in the pre-movie time, pre-sound communication time, people read quite extensively to each other. As one of the roles of like a lady's maid often would be to read to her employer.
Yeah, I find that really interesting that you talk about the communal nature of reading, and I wondered how we could apply that to the global situation we're in right now. Like, Does literature have the power to keep us connected in the age of social distancing?
I would like to say absolutely yes. I mean it's a quite a complicated question there. I really like that question because in one way it can keep us connected because I'm going to quote here one of my other favourite things growing up was Roald Dahl's Matilda, and there's a famous moment in Matilda where Matilda, in discovering books, discovers that she is not alone. So in some ways, I don't think it matters whether you're reading a book on your own or whether you're talking about a book to a class or whether you are seeing a performance on a stage. There's always that sense in which the act of reading is connecting you to the person who wrote those words, to the other readers who shared kind of thoughts and ideas about literature. Probably the other thing that I would say, I'm also teaching a second year paper, as Liam knows, on dystopian writing. And the other thing I've been thinking about a lot in teaching that paper at this moment is the way in which in dystopian text, one of the markers of a broken world or a totalitarian world or a world where we have lost connection, one of the markers is that words become forbidden and banned. And so I absolutely have been absolutely confirmed, even more than I would usually be in this kind of crisis at the moment, that it is Shakespeare, A Brave New World, that provides a kind of meaning and a counter narrative. It's Winston Smith in 1984 daring to write a diary and have his own independent thoughts. And at the moment, we're doing The Handmaid's Tale, the subversive act of a woman who's banned from reading, forming a Scrabble word or recording her own words. So I think that words and ideas are important. And in these kinds of novels and in societies in our own world that might be dystopian, I think people are suspicious of writing because it has power, and it has power to connect people, to motivate people, to inspire people, to think independently and to think empathetically. So yeah, I don't quite know if I've entirely answered your question, Liam. I haven't come up with any kind of social media ways. You're doing that with recording this. You've got the virtual festival. I've just got some thoughts about the power and importance of literature.
Maybe another really specific way to think of it is that at the moment, the human voice is a really important connector between people, and in teaching online, like with you guys studying online, the voice is really the main part of the person that you can connect to, or that is closest to what you might remember they were like in class, because so many other senses are taken away. And there's lots of things at the moment. Like this week, Taika Waititi has been coordinating a stellar-cast reading of James and the Giant Peach, and it was Andy Serkis who read The Hobbit for 12 hours, and you don't have to, you have to tune into the whole of The Hobbit. I mean, that's a big commitment, but because of the power of our computers and our phones and everything, well, you can take Andy Serkis to bed with you, and just listen to him. So there's a huge downside to current media in the way poisonous ideas spread so quickly and silly memes and stuff. But then there's that big upside as well in that linkage. And maybe in a way that links back to the idea that before people had writing systems, they had storytelling systems. People use their voices to tell stories and pass them on before anyone had anything like a kind of alphabet. So there's maybe a kind of circular thing going on, and that the point that Kirstine makes that comes up in around words inside dystopian fictions you can find lots of examples in real dystopian nightmare situations from the 20th and early 21st century, where in some way writing was used to connect people, or people somehow managed to be, the people in the Holocaust camps who still managed to somehow keep writing, or in the Soviet Gulag, and somehow smuggle it out to somebody who could unwind it and then put it in book form. And that's still a really powerful force against controlling ideas. And it's something that there's kind of innate human ingenuity about making sure that kind of communication happens in one way or another.
That's exactly right. I was kind of thinking back while Mark was talking to the last time Mark and I were doing something akin to this just before the lockdown. It seems like a different world, but we were part of one of Mark's literary salons where one of our wonderful former master students, Celeste Warner, who's now a teacher at Hillcrest, was talking about Georgette Heyer. And there's one story that she recounted about a woman in a Romanian prison who didn't even have the book in front of her. She had the book in her mind, in her memory, Friday's Child by Georgette Heyer. And by speaking those words aloud to the woman in the prison, they all kind of endured and they all got through. And so I think in that sense, literature, be it read, be it spoken, be it written, that power and kind of the unconquerable spirit of human beings. I was thinking when Mark was speaking there, that there's something about us that we're drawn to write and that we need to write, and we need to kind of preserve those words in whatever means. And there might be more possibilities in a kind of digital age. There was that lovely story too of what's his name? He was born in New Zealand, went to Wales, and he publishes under the name Tom Foolery. And he was telling the story, a kind of story in the lockdown to little brothers and sisters, little children. And it's gone absolutely viral because, again, in this moment, that power of narrative to both transport us, so we kind of get to escape from the current reality into another world, but also, I think, to connect us.
Tom Roberts, I think is his actual name.
That's right, and he kind of has that pseudonym when he's writing.
It also it kind of makes a good point as well, which you guys were saying before, with the difference between kind of reading the piece yourself, like and hearing it from the writer themselves, like speaking aloud their piece, because it definitely sort of like, I find with some pieces it adds more, you feel the emotion because they're able to articulate it, but you also you already get that sense of emotion, I think, in the written pieces as well, which so I reckon that's definitely a good point. My next question was going to be how important do you think it is to keep access to things like our online festival and virtual libraries during such a time of crisis?
I think it's hugely important, and I think it shows the ingenuity and creativity of human beings that, we're naturally, a lot of us are naturally social. I know some of my students have been saying this kind of environment is finally their ideal. They get to do everything mediated through the screen. But for me, I'd probably rather be face to face with people. But we all need connection. And what's really struck me, I think, during this whole experience is the way in which perhaps I've had to rethink some of my prejudices, kind of think, I don't know, I would much rather meet someone in person than talk to them through a camera. But when you're in a situation where that's the only way of doing things, actually there's all kinds of possibilities. And I think that something like this festival, if you think of some of the things that Mark was describing with people using the tools of technology to stay connected, but also to stay creative. And I think, you know, it takes a bit of ingenuity and you all have to learn new things, but that's also a good thing. So although it's been such a curious time, because in some ways you feel you're so shut away, almost like a hermit in retreat in a little sanctuary, which is quite an old-fashioned thing. At the same time, I've been learning all these new technologies and connecting in other ways. And so I've also felt kind of energized through that. So I think, you know, we need in any given situation to embrace new things. And we also perhaps need to think of ways in which we can learn things for the future. So if you think of something like the virtual festival, it will preserve the things that people have created and recorded for you. It will preserve, for better or worse, this dialogue today in a way that if you were all together in the same room, you'd experience that live moment, but then it's gone. So there's something I think about this kind of mode of experiencing things, and also the ability potentially to connect people across geographic space. So when you're up and running, if there was someone in London or Tokyo or Australia who thought, oh, this sounds a bit of all right, I'm going to go and see what the Virtual Writers Festival at Waikato is all about. That might be a way of even extending conversation about writing and about creativity beyond just the local to that more kind of international scope.
That's absolutely right, and this is such a great time, even more so now, for especially sharing things like poetry and flash fiction, because that matches with the amount of time people want to spend on any one site. You know, so they sort of listen to this for 5 minutes and then go to some other link, and that works really well. And again, anyone can do that. Anyone can write a poem. Anyone can record a poem, put it up, and people can examine it. Now, there's a separate series of issues then around monetizing that work, right? And in the context of the festival you're organising, that's not directly required because it's inside a different framework, and that's going to be a real issue going forward for things like writers festivals and so forth. But as a way of sharing things, it's fantastic. Now, I was very happy last week to go to a actual bookstore and touch some books again and buy quite a few of them. I'm sure Kirstine did that as well. I was very happy then, as you can see, to go to my barber and get my post-COVID look in, to sit in the cafe and have a coffee, you know, and all those things. But there are lots of other advantages. Apart from anything else, I really like working in my bare feet. I'm in my bare feet. I love that, you know. and in terms of, you know, once you've recorded a session, like one of our class sessions, well, it doesn't matter to me or to Kirstine when you go and look at it, when you go and absorb the material. So if 4 o'clock in the morning is your ideal time for checking out the Panopto, and probably the bandwidth is better that time of night, I would think, you know, then that's cool. That's cool, you know. And so I've been getting a lot more messages, I notice, you know, at 4, 5 in the morning, you know, this kind of thing, you know, where I realize that, well, fortnight is finished and real work has begun. So that actually works for people as well. But it's using those things to continue our access, and say in the case of our courses, making sure that people can still reach virtually to all the text that they need and all those library resources. And I know that librarians all over the planet are working in overdrive to work the situation for people and to get as many people into kind of virtual reading space. At least for the meantime, you know.
Awesome. Yeah, that was really interesting. I think that'll be a good place to wrap this up. I'd like to thank you both again for joining us.
Yes, thank you guys so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
pleasure. Lovely to see your faces. It's very nice. We've been emailing, but to actually see people, I think, yeah, and to harness technology for good ends.